Chapter 264. Under the influence of the Tai family, the successful development of the MX mecha, named Little White Flower, was a product of the collaboration between the Tai family and Su Lu. Lady Tai had never doubted the performance of the MX mecha because she was the only person in the Federation who knew Su Li's true background. She had great confidence in that person. Lady Tai had only started to worry after the Federal Academy of Science had conscripted Li Feng. However, when she found out through secret channels that Su Lu had personally piloted the mecha into battle, her worry faded a little. After all, she had lived with that person for so many years. Su Li's final victory, in this lady's eyes, was a matter of course. Everything was still because she had an indescribable absolute trust in the strength of that old friend of hers, right? The pearl-like white bubbles appeared evenly in the ginkgo porridge. The porridge was slightly green in color and looked appetizing. The heat was just right. Lady Tai filled 2 bowls and took one for herself. She started tasting it in the spacious kitchen. She also knew about the bet between Su Lu and Madman Li in the assembly base. As she cooked the porridge, Lady Tai thought that according to that person's seniority, Li Feng, that little tyrant, calling Su Lu uncle, was really something very normal. Madam, young Master Lin Dohai just called. He happened to be in the capital recently and wants to visit you on behalf of the family, Butler Jean said respectfully. Butler Jean said respectfully at the door. Most people in the Federation who wanted to contact the wife of the head of the Tai family had to go through Great Secretary Shen. Only the members of the 7 great families who had coexisted for countless years would go through Butler Jean. I'm not in a good mood recently. I don't want to see guests. Lady Tai gently blew on the hot porridge in the bowl and said with a smile, if those old guys in the Lin family can figure out when they only have Lin Banshan to rely on in their family, I'm very willing to meet Lin Banshan. Butler Jean understood the meaning behind Madame Jin's words. Naturally, he also knew how to reply to her call later. Lady Tai had indeed been in a bad mood for the past 2 days. Matters such as the presidential election and the standards of the new mecha did not cause her mood to fluctuate too much. Over the past 10 years or so, she had maintained a good personal friendship with each successive president. Just this point alone was enough to give her the right to treat everything in the Federation lightly. What made her feel a little unhappy was the accusation of plagiarism by the Nutshell Engineering Department against the Federal Academy of Science in the Ground Command Hall. The plagiarism incident had caused many people in the government and the management committee to feel dissatisfied. They felt that the Federation was unable to provide an explanation to the public. These people all felt that Lady Tai was behind this incident, and in the end, these feelings were all projected onto the Tai family. Lady Tai didn't care about the politicians' complaints, because no one dared to complain to her face. However, Su Lu and Shang Qiu didn't report this to Jose, which made the whole thing too passive. Regardless of how this incident would benefit the Tai family, the first thing that came to her mind was that the young man didn't respect her enough. Although Lin Yuanhu had always been independent of the Lin family, he was still a member of the Lin family. In recent years, there had been very few important people who could stand up for themselves. Just like that, he had been ruined by Su Lu. Previously, when Lin Daohai wanted to visit her, it was naturally also a careful test by the Lin family. Madam, what orders do you have for me? Secretary Shen walked in from outside. Seeing Madame Jean and Butler Jean eating porridge in the kitchen, he was slightly stunned. He had been in this manner for some time now. He roughly understood that there was still a long time before he could eat the porridge personally cooked by Madame Jean. Give Bryn a call. Lady Tai wiped her hands on her apron and casually ordered. The plagiarism incident in the Academy of Science was not a scandal that the upper echelons of the Federation wanted to see. However, strangely enough, President Sieg had no intention of suppressing this incident. She was very curious about this, so she asked Shen Li to contact the deputy director of the president's office. Yes. Secretary Shin continued, "There will be a live broadcast of the election debate in 6 days. I have made some arrangements for the news channel." Lady Tai waved her hand and stopped him from reporting. She said, "I trust you to handle this matter." Since that little fellow Su Lo had already rudely and insidiously overturned Lin Yuanhu, Lady Tai could only take advantage of this situation to gain more benefit. Senator Pabre's campaign office had been keeping quiet about this incident. However, the Tai family's influence on the media had already been highlighted. Lady Tai couldn't help but frown when she recalled Senator Pabre's deep voice and very direct rejection during the phone call today. She had never dreamed of being able to control a president, but she always felt that Senator Pabre was a little too independent. However, Pabre was someone who was going to be the president in the future, so Lady Tai would give him enough respect. However, she wouldn't treat Su Lu the same way. "What an unruly fellow," said Lady Tai in her heart. The most important thing in the Federation was rules. Su Lu had been too unruly in this incident. Lady Tai thought silently as she mixed the green porridge. She decided to give this young man another chance for now, and there wouldn't be a next time. Secrecy, silence, no one cared about him. The invisible pressure in the air from all directions caused the battle on Kaki Peak to not bring any substantial benefits to Su Lu. He didn't know that Lady Tai was doing this to protect his safety, but she was also warning him. Because he hadn't considered these two aspects at all. Would using the simulation system expose his identity as a fugitive? In the moment when his mind was filled with emotions, Su Lu would not consider this point at all. As for the warning, he had already obtained what he wanted the most from the Mecha Standards competition, a victory in both logic and spirit. That was enough to satisfy him, not to mention that he had a friend now. Loneliness was a kind of illness. Su Lu had always thought so, but he was often plagued by this illness. His closest family and friends had all disappeared in the vast universe, in the tide of people that was even wider than the universe, for some reason. So when he received Shang Qiu's call at the entrance of the West Mountain compound, he agreed without hesitation. This female engineer with a genius brain and full breasts had already become one of his most trusted companions in these past few days. The black car without a logo arrived at the bar in the southern entrance of the capital's Special Administrative Region at 10 p.m. Capital University was near the southern entrance. This was a rare social university that didn't need to be built in Linhai. The streets around the bar were filled with beautiful girls wearing short trench coat. The bar's decor was extremely high-end. Su Lu couldn't understand it, but he roughly understood that this place was at least much more high-end than those nightclubs in Donglin. Soft dance music mixed with an obscure rhythm. Although there were many people in the bar, because the area was too big, it didn't seem crowded. Young men and women gently swayed their bodies to the dance music. Dazzling geometric lights swept across the entire bar, occasionally mixing to form a three-dimensional star pattern full of a sense of space, branded on those youthful and restless bodies. Cheers! Several round glasses filled with strong alcohol were raised and lightly clinked, completely unable to suppress the happy shouts of the crowd. Other than Shang Qiu, there were also a few members of the technical team who had stayed behind in the capital who had come to attend this party. These engineers, who usually looked quiet and wooden, appeared much more relaxed than usual because of the successful development of the MX Mecha. In less than half an hour, they had already downed several bottles of good alcohol and were beginning to slurp their word. Back in the Harbor City Industrial Park, Su Lu and his colleagues in the engineering department had only communicated through the internal network. But later on, after a series of meetings, they had quickly become familiar with one another. Sitting together was quite comfortable, but hearing the praises of those engineers, Su Lu couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. Emboldened by the alcohol, the engineers walked towards the dance floor, preparing to get close to those young girls swaying their youthful bodies. Su Lu looked at them with a glass of wine in hand, and couldn't help but smile. He asked, I remember that some of you seem to be married already. Married is about the same as not being married. After the failure of last year's experiment, everyone has basically been living in the engineering department. They rarely have time to go home, Shang-Chiu replied, lying lazily on the densely woven sofa. Perhaps it was because she had drunk some alcohol, but Shang-Chiu wasn't wearing those square spectacles. Her legs were pressed under her, and her body was leaning against the sofa, which made her ample bosom appear even more conspicuous. Today, she was wearing a very casual shirt. Inside the shirt was a light green tube top. Her snow-white skin peeked out from the opening of the shirt. Even in the dim bar, it was still so dazzling. Su Lu turned his head. Seeing the moving scenery in front of Shang-Chiu's chest, he was momentarily stunned. He thought back to the moment when he had turned on the video feed for the first time in the engineering department's basement, and also the dumbfounded expressions of Lan Xiaolong and Zhou Yu standing behind him. This is a bit too big. He sighed in his heart. Under the influence of Uncle Feng Yu, Su Lu definitely couldn't be considered a gentleman. However, after all, he hadn't experienced too many things between a man and a woman. With a trace of nostalgia, he turned his head away, not daring to be blinded by the soft white skin. He called Bai Yulan. After confirming that the Bureau of Proclamation didn't make things difficult for him, he felt a lot more relaxed. He asked Shang-Chiu and told her to come to this bar for a few drinks. Of course, I don't have any objections. Shang-Chiu said, your secretary Bai has actually done a lot for MX. You and I both know that. She paused, then suddenly raised the glass in her hand very seriously and said, Su Lu, thank you. What's there to thank me for? Su Lu said sincerely. He gently touched her glass and said, I just want to take back what originally belonged to me. Speaking of which, on behalf of Professor Shern and myself, I really want to thank you for what you said in the command center. The two sat next to each other. Su Lu looked at Shang-Chiu's black and messy hair, and realized that without glasses, she looked more beautiful and soft than usual. However, he felt a little awkward where his gaze landed, so he used his finger to point in the air. Shang-Chiu followed his finger and looked down. She smiled. In fact, she usually paid a lot of attention to what she wore. If it weren't for the fact that they were in a relaxing place like a bar and in a semi-enclosed private booth space, she definitely wouldn't have unbuttoned her outer shirt. However, she didn't expect Su Lu to be so uneasy. Don't tell me you're still a virgin? Shang-Chiu didn't button up her shirt. Instead, she blinked and asked with great interest. The light was blurred, and there was a lingering fragrance in the glass. The woman beside him said a bold and direct sentence. Su Lu felt his face heat up. He raised his glass and didn't answer. In the quiet bar, there were occasional small disturbances, but they quickly subsided. Why did you choose this bar? It's all young people playing here. Under the influence of alcohol, it's easy to have problems. Su Lu looked at the small stage in the depths of the bar. On the stage, there was a girl wearing a light blue skin-tight suit. She was singing and dancing to the music, exuding a faint blurred smell. The bar's decoration was very good. The design was very modern and charming, but it always looked like a place where young people should be. Aren't you a young person? Shang-Chiu looked at him curiously. She didn't understand how she could hear such an old man's words from his mouth. Su Lu was slightly stunned. He realized that there was probably a problem with his mentality. He smiled and covered it up. Not long after, Bai Yulan walked into the bar and found the booth where everyone was sitting. When the two of them met, they didn't say much. They took a glass of wine and drank it in one gulp. A lock of black hair fell between Bai Yulan's eyebrows. He habitually lowered his head and filled Su Li's glass with wine. Then, he raised his head and thought about the scene he saw at the old moon base. He said softly, Boss, I've been thinking about it these past 2 days. You gave me $20 million. Do you want me to refund you some money? Su Lu gave Bai Yulan the bank card not because he wanted to buy a horse with $1,000. It was because he had never thought of forming an anti-government organization in a social environment like the Federation. He just needed a capable and reliable helper by his side. In the original plan, Bai Yulan, as the Federation's most familiar pilot with MX, could help him develop it smoothly. He could also participate in the mecha battle. However, Su Lu personally went to the mecha battle. In his normal work life, there weren't many places where he could use Bai Yulan. That was why Bai Yulan said those words. "What's wrong?" Su Lu didn't think of this and asked in surprise. The slow rhythm in the bar, but the sound effects were not muffled. They covered the two people's conversation. Bai Yulan laughed lightly and said, "Other than making the bed, pouring tea, and killing people, I don't seem to have much use for you." At this time, Shang Qiu was already drunk. She didn't pay attention to what they were talking about. She buttoned up her shirt and walked out of the booth, preparing to go to the washroom. Su Lu looked at her and couldn't help but laugh. Shang Qiu's white shirt buttons were done wrongly, which made her chest look even more exaggerated. Only now did he understand that women with amazing figures would attract the attention of others no matter what they wore. Sometimes, attracting attention wasn't a good thing. Shang Qiu swayed her way through the bar. The bar patrons all noticed this woman with a unique temperament and mesmerizing chest. Luckily, the waters of the capital special district were too murky. This bar beside the capital university was also a well-known place that Shang Qiu had specially chosen. Although she attracted the attention of countless burning gazes, no one dared to approach her. After working together for so long, Su Lu knew that Shang Qiu was not someone to be trifled with. Plus, there were so many companions in the bar, so he wasn't too worried about her safety. Instead, he was worried that she would pass out drunk when she reached the washroom. He looked in that direction worriedly, and after informing Bai Yulan, he followed her. This chapter is published at a fixed time. At this time, it should be on the way to sending Ah Huang and Ah He to the pet shop. It will leave tomorrow morning. I saved some manuscripts, but I'm still worried. From now on, it will be published at a fixed time every day. It's probably because of the Ku Klux Klan. It will continue until the 11th of next month. Chapter 265. There would always be many cliché stories repeated in a bar, especially when a woman like Shang Qiu, who had the ability to cause a commotion, passed by. However, Su Lu always thought that he was not qualified to compete with others for a woman's affection, so the heavens would not arrange such a cliché story for him. But just as he walked a few steps out of the booth, he saw Shang Qiu snatch a glass of wine from the bar beside her and splash it directly on someone's face. Su Lu was slightly shocked. He rushed to Shang Qiu's side and held her arm. It was slightly cold to the touch, and the back of his hand was tender and smooth. It was quite moving. "Are you okay?" He did not have time to see who was on the other side of the conflict. He lowered his head and asked Shang Qiu, "Did someone reach out to you?" "I'm not drunk." Shang Qiu frowned, but she did not know that she had buttoned the wrong button on her shirt. She waved her hand and said, "No one reached out. It's just that this guy said something about a young master wanting to treat me to a drink. His tone was very annoying." Su Lu was slightly startled. He turned around and saw a middle-aged man wiping the wine off his face. Looking at the middle-aged man's attire, he should be a powerful figure in the Federation. However, he was only inviting her on behalf of someone else. He did not know who the person behind this was. He didn't ask Shang Qiu how annoying that person's tone was, because they were engineers in their bones, and they were somewhat incompatible with this society. Some people with power and money were probably used to looking down on others and using frivolity to represent their strength, but Shang Qiu were not used to it. Of course, Su Lu was not worried that he would not be able to clean up the mess later. Although his role in the development of MX was forcefully suppressed by the government, Shang Qiu and the Nutshell Engineering Department's contributions were already set in stone. From a certain perspective, Shang Qiu was now a hero of the Federation. At this time, who would be foolish enough to provoke her? Even if they made a scene in public, they would only be at a disadvantage. I just want to invite this lady up for a drink on behalf of my young master. I don't know why I was treated so rudely, the middle-aged man standing not far away said angrily as he wiped the wine off his face. Sulu knew the details of the matter, so naturally, he could not answer. He looked up and saw that in the luxurious bar on the second floor of the bar, there were a few young people in luxurious clothes whispering softly. They would turn their heads from time to time, as if they were commenting on him or Shang Qiu. His eyes narrowed as he recognized one of the faces. He also found that the back of the person who was facing him was somewhat familiar. For a moment, he couldn't help but feel a little confused. Although this bar was the most famous high-end nightclub next to Capital University, with the identity of the young man's family, he shouldn't have come to such a place. He didn't want to cause trouble, but he wouldn't torture himself to apologize to the middle-aged man in front of him. He was about to leave with Shang Qiu when Shang Qiu said with a slightly red face, "I'm in a hurry." Sulu immediately remembered this matter and walked forward with her. He was used to seeing Shang Qiu's strange appearance mixed with the spirit of an engineer. It was rare to see her blushing, so it was quite enjoyable. The middle-aged man clearly did not expect that this pair would walk away like he was nothing. Not only did they not apologize, they did not even say a word of apology. When Sulu and Shang Qiu returned, there were a few more people blocking their way. "It's really cliché," Shang Qiu said with a wink. Sulu had joked about this kind of cliché on the way here. The bar was very large, so not many people would notice the commotion here. Even if they did, they would be blocked out of the area by people who came from who knew where. Sulu narrowed his eyes and looked at the people in front of him. He was not surprised that they would bring so many people to drink. After all, they were the children of aristocratic families. It was rare for them to experience the hardships of the common people, so they had to be extra careful about their safety. At this time, a very calm voice came from above the isolated quiet area. "It's fine if you don't drink, but it's not good for you to be like a shrew when you're so pretty. You should at least apologize to my people." Some people thought that they were elegant and calm, so they could act like they were hiding a needle in a velvet glove, but they did not know that these words were really asking for a beating. Sulu looked at the magnolia flower who was quietly approaching. He heard Shang Qiu yell, "I want to apologize to your mother." Shang Qiu was 24 years old this year. She worked in the underground of the Nutshell Engineering Department for many years. She rarely saw the sun, so her skin was as white as snow. Her beautiful face and exaggerated figure were indeed very eye-catching. However, when she said the word "mother," it really revealed her character. As the technical director of the Nutshell Engineering Department, she was not just a beauty. The young man upstairs could not sit still. His face darkened and he walked down the stairs. A quiet girl in the luxurious compartment looked at him with a trace of helplessness in her eyes. Sulu looked at the young man walking down the stairs. His expression did not change, but when he saw Li Xiaotong who followed him downstairs, he could not help but feel that it was a small world. It turned out that the familiar figure upstairs was actually the seventh young master of the Li family. When Li Xiaotong saw Sulu, he could not help but be slightly startled. He immediately showed a bitter smile and said, "Dohai, don't mess around. This is my friend." It was a rare scene for two of the second generation of the 7 great families to appear in this bar. The one who had asked his subordinates to invite Shang Qiu upstairs to drink was Lin Dohai. Lin Dohai's trip was originally to visit Lady Tai in the back mountain of Macho according to his family's intention. However, he was coldly refused. He had to stay in the capital for a few days to see what happened. The Li and Lin families had been close in recent years. Li Qishao, who was in the capital, naturally had to do the reception work. However, Lin Dohai did not want to go to those quiet clubs. He asked to come to the bar near the Capital University. Lin Daohai made this choice because the quiet girl was studying at the capital university. He had invited Shang Qiu upstairs because he liked Shang Qiu's hot body. He wanted to vent his anger on the quiet girl. However, he did not expect that the girl with the impressive figure seemed to have a strong background. Not only did she splash wine on his subordinates, but she was also called a friend by Li Qishao. After a moment of silence, Lin Daohai narrowed his eyes and looked at Su Li's face, feeling that it was somewhat familiar. He suddenly opened his mouth and said coldly, "Seventh young Master Li, I'll give you face and let them apologize." Li Xiaotong did not answer and just stood quietly on the side. After waiting for a while, he found that there was only silence around him. Lin Daohai looked back in surprise. "You're not the legitimate successor of the Li family, and you were quite close to me before. I've already given you enough face. What else do you want?" "Li Qishao, I will give you face and let them get out of the way. This matter will be over." In the silence, Su Lu suddenly opened his mouth. However, even he felt that these words were somewhat awkward. Li Xiaotong's words were very pleasing to his ears. His usually gloomy face suddenly looked like a flower in the snow that had been washed by water. He smiled very gently and replied, "That's great. This bar belongs to one of my men. I'll ask him to send you 2 bottles of good wine later." When the people came down the stairs, Shang Qiu knew that today's situation was somewhat different. She had seen some children of rich families in the Federation. However, she could clearly feel that the 2 young people today were obviously a level higher than those people. Whether it was their words or the information revealed in their actions, they all proved this. Thus, she fell silent, wanting to see how Su Lu planned to handle this matter. But after these 2 or 3 simple words, not only was Shang Qiu stunned, but Lin Daohai and his subordinates were also astonished. Lin Daohai said that he was giving face to Li Xiaotong, and Su Lu also said that he was giving face to Li Xiaotong. In truth, Li Xiaotong's last words were giving face to Su Lu. When had the children of the 7 great families ever been so disrespected? Lin Daohai's face was so gloomy that it seemed like it would condense into ice. He coldly said, "Since that's the case, Li Xiaotong, don't blame me for not giving you face. That's too awkward. Face is earned by oneself, not given by others." Su Lu narrowed his eyes and expressed his opinion. He didn't pay attention to Lin Daohai and only looked at Uncle Kong behind him, who seemed to be facing a great enemy. He asked, "How have you been recently?" Kong Wu naturally wouldn't answer. His eyes had long been fixed on the delicate man behind Su Lu. He didn't know when this man had snuck over, but he also knew how terrifying the strength of these 2 young people was. If a conflict were to break out at this time, he simply couldn't guarantee the safety of his young master. Thus, he walked over to Lin Daohai and softly said a few words. Lin Daohai's expression slightly changed. Only now did he recall the wine party in Gangdu and associate it with the scene of that day. An unprecedented anger welled up in his heart, but this was Li Qishao's territory. Since the other party had already spoken and he didn't want to shed all pretense of cordiality, he could only wait until after the matter was over. Su Lu said to Li Xiaotong, "Where's Brother Xing?" Li Xiaotong smiled bitterly and said, "I'll tell you in 2 days." Watching the man and woman leave, Lin Daohai was silent for a long time at the top of the stairs. He turned his head to look coldly at Li Xiaotong and said, "Don't you have anything to say?" Li Xiaotong glanced at him indifferently. He didn't need to explain anything, but he knew that this person had remembered Su Lu. In order to help Su Lu reduce some of the trouble, he opened his mouth and said, "He is Su Lu." Su Lu. Lin Daohai repeated this name silently in his heart, thinking that he understood Li Xiaotong's fear. The inside story of the mecha battle had been sealed, but it couldn't stop existences like the 7 great families from finding out the details. In his impression, this was an even crazier person who had forced Madman Li to call him uncle. Li Xiaotong ignored him and walked up the stairs, a cold smile on his lips. He thought to himself, The girl you wanted to force up to drink with is probably Shang Qiu from Nutshell. Even your family's Dean Lin was flipped over by this woman, so who do you think you are? Lin Dohai stood where he was, unmoving. With the mention of Su Li's name, he thought of many things, including the commotion caused by the mecha battle a few days ago. The double humiliation made it impossible for him to stay in this bar any longer, especially when he thought of that quiet girl who had been watching this scene from upstairs. He felt even more furious, and he left with his subordinates in a huff. Dohai still has a childish temper. I hope he can change it after marriage, said Li Xiaodong as he looked at the quiet girl on the sofa. My engagement with him has already been annulled, but he came to school to see me today. After all, we've known each other since we were young, and he knew you were here too, so I didn't reject him. I didn't expect him to lose his composure like this. The quiet girl gently brushed her fluffy black hair, a trace of sadness in her beautiful eyes. It was Nan Xiangmei. Annulled? When did this happen? Li Xiaodong frowned. The annulment of the marriage between the Lin family and the Nan family was naturally a big deal, but why hadn't there been any news about it? Nan Xiangmei didn't want to explain these personal matters, and it was even more inconvenient to say that Lin Banshan had boarded the train in the middle of the night. After all, this wasn't a glorious story for the two families. She gently blinked her eyes and suddenly asked curiously, "The one downstairs was Su Lu, right? Are you familiar with him?" "You know Su Lu?" Li Xiaotong was surprised again. He felt that Su Lu was a person he couldn't see through. Why did an ordinary Federation citizen seem to know everyone in the circle of the 7 great families? Nan Xiangmei sat quietly and said softly, "I guess you can say that I know him." Then she nodded vigorously, as if she wanted to use this cute action to express her confirmation of this matter. "I met him on the train." Nan Xiangmei smiled, revealing her pearly white teeth. She wasn't familiar with Li Xiaodong, but she found that he seemed to know that person. "He's an engineer from Nutshell. How do you know him?" Li Xiaodong's hand that was holding the wine glass slightly stiffened. He thought of the racing in the suburbs of Wangdu, and the knife light in the ivy garden. He couldn't help but laugh at himself and said softly, "He's the biggest investment I've made in my life, and from what I see now, it should be a steady profit." Li Xiaodong and Su Li's private dealings couldn't be hidden from the eagle-like eyes of the family elders. Li Xiaodong subdued the master invited by the family, Brother Zeng, but now Brother Zeng was transferred away. This should be a warning from the family to him, but 7th young Master Li wasn't worried about this. Su Lu, whom he invested in, had begun to stand out and shine in the Federation. A firm calculator was a businessman. He would never place all his resources on one planet, and he would never place all his chips on one side of the planet. Just like a hedge fund, Li Xiaodong had invested in Su Lu a long time ago. After the battle with Ka Qifeng, this vision was bound to be praised by the family, although Su Lu had an extremely bad impact on the family's affairs. Nan Xiangmei looked at him who was lost in thought. She gathered her courage and asked softly with a slightly red face, "Can you tell me his contact information?" Li Xiaodong, who had always been calm and even a little gloomy, was dumbfounded when he heard this request. "Didn't you say that you knew each other? It turned out that you just met by chance, but now you want Su Li's contact information?" Although Li Xiaodong now thought that he and Su Lu were friends, he still felt that life was unfair. A guy who used to be a soldier made Zhou Yu, whom he and Madman Li both liked, pregnant, and now seduced the daughter of the Nan family, who had the strictest upbringing among the 7 families. How could he summon the courage to chase after her? Chapter 266. It's not that I'm a troublemaker, Shang Qiu angrily explained to her companions. She buttoned up her shirt and waved her hand. "I don't usually dress like this. That day in the command hall, you all saw how solemn and serious I was dressed." The engineers of the technical team hurriedly nodded. Su Lu scratched his head and said with a smile, "But I remember that you wore even less than this in the engineering department." Shang Qiu knew that he was talking about the video. She chuckled and said, I never thought of myself as a woman in the engineering department, because these guys are not men in my eyes. The members of the technical team all nodded with a bitter face. They thought that only after working together for a long time could they know how perverted and strict this woman's requirements were. After the party was over, Su Lu drove Shang Qiu back to the hotel. Looking at the road ahead, he explained, the person who invited you to drink today is the young master of the Lin family, one of the 7 major families. Shang Qiu was slightly stunned. Her eyes moved as if they could speak. Looking at his profile, she shook her head and sighed. I know that you have connections with the Ministry of National Defense. Otherwise, that perverted major of the 83-84 unit would not be responsible for protecting you in Harbor City. But I didn't expect that you have connections with all the major families in the Federation. Su Lu shrugged and said, It's just something that happened in the past 2 years. I feel a bit confused. Are you jealous of me? Do you want me to introduce you to some of the young masters of the major families? Speaking of which, the young masters of the major families are usually well-educated. People like Lin Daohai are rare. Forget it. 7 major families? Shang Qiu burped, unable to hide the feeling of drunkenness in her head, and closed her eyes. In the autumn of the capital, the streets and alleys in the middle of the night had not snowed yet. The automatic heating and snow removal system under the ground was naturally not activated. Therefore, the surroundings were quiet. The wind blew the yellow leaves on the quiet sidewalk. Su Lu subconsciously rolled down the window. He didn't want the thick bulletproof and soundproof glass to block out the rustling sound of the withered leaves on the ground. Rustle, rustle. This was the sound of autumn. Su Lu listened to it happily, his hands firmly gripping the steering wheel. In Donglin, where there was no distinction between the 4 seasons, the smell of autumn could only be felt in prose anthologies. The cold air blew in through the window. His face was slightly cold and he shivered. However, he felt refreshed. Immediately, he remembered that there was someone beside him. He immediately closed the window and looked out of the corner of his eye. Shang Qiu quietly leaned on the chair with a trace of exhaustion and relaxation on her face. Her sparse eyelashes, the tip of her nose, slightly pouted lips, and smooth chin formed an exquisite line. The seatbelt was tightly fastened on the girl's body, causing her bulging breasts to sink in. Su Lu didn't have any thoughts of lust. He just looked at her quietly. He knew how tired she had been over the past few years because of Embark. It was probably only on nights like this that she could truly relax. Since he was young, his goal had been to become a top mechanic in the Federation. Now, he was walking on this path. Beside him, Shang Qiu was undoubtedly someone worthy of his respect. At such a young age, she had already achieved something that many engineers could never achieve in their lifetime. He turned back to drive. Shang Qiu slowly woke up. She looked at Su Li's side profile with blurry eyes, thinking about where this guy came from. In her heart, something similar to Su Li's previous thoughts surged out. She was also a fanatic worshipper of technology. In the past few days of working together, she had been shocked by Su Li's overflowing design concept. She was even more shocked by his genius idea to solve the Z4. She didn't know the secrets in Su Li's mind, so this young man seemed even more mysterious and powerful in her heart. You're awake, Su Li said. The black car drove on the quiet night streets of the capital. After a moment of silence, Shang Qiu suddenly asked, Do you have a girlfriend? Su Lu was silent for a moment. His voice was a little hoarse as he replied, No. Shang Qiu looked out the window and suddenly laughed. She looked at herself in the mirror and thought that she was still a few years older than him. Moreover, she had never thought about the matters between men and women. Why would she suddenly ask such a funny personal question? What about you? Su Lu asked. I don't have one either. Shang Qiu rested her face on her hand and looked at him quietly. She said, I look down on men in the Federation, but you're an exception. Su Li's heart skipped a beat. His palms on the steering wheel were sweating. However, Shang Qiu immediately smiled and said, "Unfortunately, a little virgin like you is too mysterious. I just want to quietly stay in the engineering department." Although it was a joking explanation, it vaguely pointed out something. Su Li's young heart felt like it had been frozen. It was not to describe cold disappointment, but to describe a crisp, cool, and very comfortable feeling. Su Li's face was a little hot. He did not understand why the girl with the impressive figure beside him would say such a thing. "This time, you've made a great contribution to the company, or rather, to the Federation. Although I don't understand why the board of directors hasn't made any moves yet." Shang Qiu looked at Su Lu with interest. She found that the boy was avoiding her gaze. She found it more and more interesting. However, she did not want to embarrass Su Lu too much, so she changed the topic. "What are your plans for the future?" The warm car, the hot girl, and the soft breasts that could kill eyes. Su Lu looked ahead. He could also feel an ambiguous atmosphere pervading the air. When he heard this, he immediately let out a sigh of relief and replied, "What plans can I have? I'll probably go back to Whitewater first. My file is still there." "Do you want me to transfer you to the engineering department?" Although Mr. Jose was angry at the command center that day, he would definitely want you to go over. The board of directors would probably promote you directly to level 1 technical supervisor. Shang Qiu sat up straight and placed her hands calmly on her smooth thighs. She calmed the trace of uneasiness in her heart and smiled calmly as she spoke. The Shell Motor Company was a giant company that prioritized technology above all else. There was an independent technical director on the board of directors, and below that was a Level 3 technical supervisor system. Level 1 technical supervisors were usually important figures in the various large companies under them. Because of Shang Qiu's ability in mecha design in the engineering department, she had only been acting as Level 1 technical supervisor for half a year. However, given the huge impact Su Lu had played in the development of the MX mecha this time, it was not unthinkable for them to make an exception and promote him to Level 1 technical supervisor. The problem was, he knew very well that his future in the Federation Company had always been under the watch of Lady Tai, so he could not say anything. The black car stopped outside the Cloud Queen Hotel. Su Lu stared at the display on the car's radar, and only relaxed after confirming that no one from Lin Daohai's side was following them. This was a high-class hotel of the Federal Military. Shang Qiu and the technical team were staying here. Even if Lin Daohai had the guts as big as the sky, he would not dare to come and cause trouble here. Before getting out of the car, Shang Qiu suddenly turned around and hugged Su Lu tightly. She planted a big kiss on his face and said, "Don't think too much. I just want to thank you." Su Lu was stunned for a moment. Feeling the softness on his face and the fullness and softness of her breasts, he was completely speechless. By the time he returned to the apartment in Wangdu District, it was already past 2 a.m. After drinking, Su Lu felt a little thirsty, but he did not have the desire to sleep. He opened a bottle of purified water, leaned comfortably on the sofa, and stared blankly at the television. Su Lu knew that his cooperation with the engineering department had ended. Perhaps in the years to come, he would not have the opportunity to work closely with those engineers again. Perhaps it would be very difficult to see Shang Qiu again in the future. Therefore, when he thought of the gathering in the bar earlier and the hug before parting, he felt a little nostalgic. It had been a long time since he had such intimate contact with the opposite sex. Su Lu narrowed his eyes as he watched the Federation TV Awards ceremony and said to himself in his heart, at his age, it should have been the time of youth and yearning for spring. However, when he thought about the relationship between a man and a woman, he would think of that pair of black-rimmed glasses and that ball of fireworks that disappeared in the atmosphere of S2. His heart would ache, so he refused to think about it. Before, he had been partying, but now, he was lonely. Su Lu sat alone on the sofa without moving. His feet were on the coffee table, and the metallic phone was by his feet. Just like him, he was silent and quiet. A night without anyone to contact was indeed difficult to get through. Lin Yuanhu had fallen, but many people in the Federation were still standing. There was not much that Su Lu could do, but he wanted to see how things would develop. The TV was broadcasting the Federation Autumn Literary Awards. The star who had won the Best Female Lead in a Drama Series was hugging the award excitedly. She was sobbing uncontrollably. Then, she smiled faintly and said, "This is really an exciting year. The results of the presidential election are not out yet, but I have already won the award." The celebrity audience below the stage laughed and applauded one after another. The beautiful curly-haired female star smiled and said, "Of course I have to thank many people. However, at this time, I should be thanking Jian Shuer for not signing up." Then, the curly-haired female star said seriously, "I hope that nothing will stop us from admiring beautiful things. Jian Shuer, we will wait for your return." The audience applauded. Ever since the terrorist attack at the Huanshan 4 Prefectures concert, the Federation Channel 23 TV series that was popular throughout the universe stopped broadcasting. Jian Shuer also disappeared from the screen. She had not appeared for a long time. Su Lu watched the TV quietly. He thought about the idol of the Federation that he had almost forgotten. Thinking about his obsession back then, he felt that the progress of life was so fast that he could not react. In the past year, because he had been busy with many things, he had not watched TV for a long time. Thinking about this, he fell asleep quietly on the sofa. The simple security monitoring system around the apartment faithfully carried out its mission. When dawn broke, the phone on the coffee table that had been quiet all this time suddenly rang. Su Lu rubbed his eyes and pulled back his somewhat numb legs. He saw that there was an email on the phone. The sender was a string of confidential asterisks. The email said, Chapter 267. In a remote industrial town surrounded by 4 mountain estates in the S2 sector, it was currently dusk. The warm twilight sun shone on the simple and crude buildings. The S2 planetary system had several of the Federation's most important resource planets, as well as the Federation's most developed heavy industrial base. Most of the Shell Motor Company's production lines were set up on this planet. The Federation's great industry flourished, and the disparity between the rich and the poor was especially evident on this planet. That was why Green Dragon Mountain, surrounded by 4 heavy industry provinces, produced a group of armed forces that dared to oppose the federal government. In the eyes of historians, this was an extremely natural matter. Although the Federation had been constantly passing legislation over the years to seek a balance between the interests of capitalists and workers, and had achieved a lot of results, the rise of George Carlinism in the Federation society brought a fatal blow to this attempt. The anti-government forces were besieged and suppressed for decades, but instead became stronger and stronger. Fortunately, in the past decade or so, the federal government had pursued a policy of combining military force with economic blockade, which had successfully curbed the development of the anti-government forces. It was only in recent years that the armed forces had been driven deep into the mountains and forests. Green Dragon Mountain was a large mountain range that spanned 2,000 kilometers. There were 4 large states surrounding this mountain range, and it was the base of the heavy industry of the Federation back then. The people who lived here were staunch supporters of Senator Macklin's non-violent resistance, even if they did not support the anti-government army's idea of using force. Because of years of fighting and the Federation's strict blockade policy, the industrial areas near the Green Dragon Mountains had gradually become desolate, especially this industrial town, which showed signs of decay everywhere. Zhang Xiaoming, wearing a work outfit, walked out of the relay station's workshop. She smiled and greeted her colleagues who passed by her before walking back to her room. She had been in S2 for more than half a year. Under the arrangement of her leader, she entered the industrial town incognito. Nominally, the relay station was actually a hidden information node of the anti-government forces intelligence organization in the mountains, and she was the person in charge here. In the past half a year, Zhang Xiaoming experienced the terrorist attack at the concert and also personally experienced several secret military encirclements by the government forces. Although the government did not admit to those small-scale encirclements, and the real executors were the three large security companies in the Federation, those battles of blood and fire, the deaths of her companions, and the torn flesh of her companions made her mature quickly. She was no longer the young girl who only knew her ideals. The treachery and cruelty of the Federation government taught her a lesson. It made her give up any illusions. Deep down, she began to doubt Senator Medellin's idea of nonviolence, as well as his idea of joining the Federation government. Was it a legitimate seizure of power, or was it a form of capitulation? This industrial town was the fourth location of the relay station that Zhang Xiaoming was in. The previous three had been mercilessly destroyed by the government's mercenaries. Many of her companions had died, but Zhang Xiaoming did not become numb to death. Instead, she became more serious in her work. She carefully and quickly combed through the information sent back from the capital, and then sent it to the mountains through a secret channel. In the canteen, Zhang Xiaoming bought a box of potatoes and beans. Along with white rice and accompanied by the sunset, she squatted by the forest and began to eat her dinner. From time to time, she would push her hair to the side. The black-rimmed glasses were no longer there. Her originally beautiful face was a little darker, but it also made her look healthier and more determined. The food was not delicious, but Zhang Xiaoming ate it with relish. This was because she knew that even this food was extremely difficult for the guerrillas under the Federation's strict blockade. After finishing the last mouthful of rice, before she could wash the dishes, she was called back. "Why are you here?" Zhang Xiaoming looked at the middle-aged man in front of her and asked in surprise. In the entire relay station, she was probably the only one who knew that this middle-aged man was the head of the intelligence organization of the anti-government army. He was called one of the 5 people worth learning from by the young master of the Tai family. "Have you sent the information?" "Yes," Zhang Xiaoming answered briskly. The middle-aged man was silent for a moment, then looked at Zhang Xiaoming and said, "You should have already seen my analysis. Behind the Federation's new Mecca, there is the issue of the presidential election. The organization has long been unable to control Senator Medellin, but you should know very well why Su Lu is involved in this matter." Zhang Xiaoming lowered her head and said softly, "I understand." The middle-aged man said, "The organization does not want a young person who sympathizes with the progressive forces to be in danger because of a misunderstanding like this. That is why they agreed to let you contact him and tell him that you are still alive." "Thank you," Zhang Xiaoming said. "Get ready. We are about to leave," he said with a serious expression. With a serious expression, he said, "The Federation's presidential election has reached a critical juncture. According to my understanding, some people in the Federation are about to launch an attack on Medellin. I think it's time for us to do something." "What can we do?" Zhang Xiaoming asked seriously. "Do you have the courage to stand in the Hall of Congress, in front of the countless millions of people in the Federation, and accuse Medellin?" The middle-aged man looked quietly into Zhang Xiaoming's eyes. "No misunderstanding, no story. However, life, or the universe, was born from countless misunderstandings. That little black dot from billions of years ago, perhaps because it had misunderstood its own restlessness, it exploded and released countless energy substances, creating time and shaping the long river of history. It allowed those intelligent life forms that were born by chance to act out scenes of misunderstandings, joys, and sorrows. Perhaps it was not a misunderstanding in the first place, but a lie. When Su Lu drove the black car to the Milky Way cemetery, he thought of the email he saw in the morning and thought about it. He gently hummed the tune of 27 glasses of wine as he drove the car briskly along the mountain road. He didn't seem to be angry at being deceived, because he didn't know that the email was sent by Zhang Xiaoming. He thought that some bad uncle knew that after he won the battle with Ka Qifeng, he could no longer hide behind the curtain and watch the show, so he took the initiative to contact him. After escaping from Eastwood to the capital ring, Su Lu had gradually discovered the relationship between Uncle Feng Yu and the Lees of Philadelphia, as well as the vague truth of the matter. He had already confirmed that Uncle Feng Yu was a very amazing person. Even the big explosion back then did not kill him, so how did he die 2 years ago? When they parted on the outskirts of Hushi State, Uncle Feng Yu gave him the metal bracelet and told him not to think about avenging himself. In addition, Su Lu had recently been convinced that the fierce Uncle Feng Yu must still be alive in some corner of the universe, so he naturally thought that the email was sent by Uncle Feng Yu. Knowing that the uncle was still alive, Su Li's heart did not have the slightest anger of being lied to. There was only joy bursting out from the depths of his heart. With this rich joy, or even ecstasy, he drove the black car into the Milky Way cemetery. Holding a bouquet of flowers, he walked to a quiet corner in the depths of the cemetery. Looking at the 3 words, Xin Yulin, carved on the black stone, Su Li's face did not show any sadness. He just quietly crouched down, plucked the fallen leaves on the black stone, and placed the flowers on it. Uncle Feng Yu and Professor Shen were the 2 most important teachers in his career as a mechanic. Although he had not spent much time with Professor Shen, in terms of feelings, Su Lu was definitely much closer to Feng Yu. However, the trust Professor Shen had placed in him before he passed away made him feel incomparably warm. The uncle was still alive, and the core data left behind by Professor Shen had helped the Federation successfully develop the MX Mecha. All these happy things gathered together. In this past year, Su Li's mood had rarely been so relaxed and happy. He lit 2 cigarettes. One was placed on the edge of Professor Shen's tombstone, while the other was held between his fingers. He slowly inhaled. Light blue smoke rose up in the late autumn cemetery, just like the fog in the mountains. Perhaps it was because of the smoke, but Su Li's eyes were somewhat sore. Very naturally, he thought back to the scene of the professor sitting on the ladder in the laboratory and smoking with him before his death. He looked at the black tombstone, and after a moment of silence, he said, "Professor, we succeeded." In the next few days or so, the Federation government would hold an official press conference to announce the development process of the MX Mecha. With the Federal Academy of Sciences' reputation in tatters, on the Shell Motor Company's Little White Flower Mecha, in the history of the Federation, the soon-to-be-forgotten name of Xin Yulin would definitely be remembered. The sound of footsteps suddenly rang out in the cemetery. Su Lu stood up and turned his head to look. He saw a white-haired old man, accompanied by several people, walking in his direction. Su Lu had only seen this old man's back from a distance at the entrance of that high-class hotel. However, from the countless photographs in books and magazines, as well as the scenes in the news, he quickly recognized the other's identity. He just didn't understand why this person would come to the cemetery. Lin Yuanhu slowly walked up to Professor Shen's tombstone and looked at the eternal sleeper in the grave. In just a few days' time, this leader of the Federation's academic community looked many years older. His entire person was like a withered tree, ready to fall at any moment in the autumn wind. "You're Su Lu, right?" "Yes. Tomorrow, I will resign from my position as the Dean of the Federal Academy of Science." The age spots on Lin Yuanhu's face were particularly obvious. Su Lu noticed this, but then he thought of Professor Shen's appearance before he died. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said, "Why did you come? Do you want to seek inner peace?" "I have been to this cemetery before." Lin Yuanhu gently coughed twice, stopping his entourage from coming forward. He said in an old voice, "I just hope to be able to obtain his or your forgiveness." Su Lu looked at him quietly. Shang Qiu had already described the scene in the command hall to him in detail. However, for some reason, when he saw Lin Yuanhu's calm expression of atonement, he felt a strong sense of discomfort in his heart. He stared into Lin Yuanhu's old eyes and said word by word, "Forgive? No, including you, I will not forgive a single one of them. Your performance doesn't mean that you are open and honest enough. You were just beaten down by the trap I planned for half a year. You had no other choice. In the end, you just wanted to play the role of a calm, atoning old man, a man who admits his mistake. However, in the eyes of me and Professor Shen Underground, this is very disgusting." Chapter 268. The leader of the academic community in the Federation collapsed just like that. With ironclad evidence and the deliberate instigation of certain parties in the Federation, Lin Yuanhu was forced to step down. The academic community that he had single-handedly controlled for several decades was also temporarily plunged into chaos and silence. Sometimes, Su Lu would think of Lin Yuanhu's desolate figure in the cemetery. When news of Lin Yuanhu's death came a year later, Lin Yuanhu had also asked himself this question. In the end, there was only the same conclusion: unforgivable. The bigwigs in the Federation had done all sorts of bad things in their lives. In the end, they would lay down their weapons and shed tears in front of the dead, asking for peace of mind and facing the shadow of death head-on. This seemed to be a very common thing, but Su Lu was unwilling to accept this kind of absurd reality. He knew very well that many people, including Lady Tai, were very angry at this plan that he had been planning for half a year. The Tai family had only wanted to use the new mecha standards to attack their opponents in the presidential election, but they had also shrewdly hoped to control this conflict within a certain range. Su Lu had dealt a blow to Lin Yuanhu and the Federal Academy of Science. It had really been too ruthless and thorough, and had already exceeded the limits of those people. A small fry had finally overthrown a giant in the upper echelons of the Federation. This would probably make some people feel a chill run down their spines, a sense of insecurity that came from outside the rules. But why hadn't the Federation government tried to cover up this matter? At the very least, why had they tried to minimize the impact of this scandal? Su Lu sometimes thought about this question. He didn't know which people in the government had stood on the opposite side of the 7 great families. Su Lu had helped the Nutshell Engineering Department develop the MX Mecha, and had personally struck down Zi Hai at the summit of Cocky Peak. The insider trading between the Li family and the Federal Academy of Science, as well as that pair of presidential candidates, had fallen into his hands alone. The Li family had dominated the financial and economic field of the Federation for a long time. They had spent a lot of money on the presidential election. Su Li's actions had naturally offended the Li family. Indirectly, he had also become the absolute enemy of the Lin family. If an ordinary citizen of the Federation knew that 2 of the 7 major families of the Federation were constantly trying to erase their existence, they would tremble in fear. They would either flee to Bermuda and fight for their lives, or simply commit suicide. However, Su Lu wasn't worried about this. At least for now, he still had Lady Tai's shadow behind him. As long as the cooperation continued, those people wouldn't be able to do anything to him directly. But what about the future? Su Lu thought about the future. If Tai Ziyuan appeared again in the future, he believed that guy would definitely save his life. Moreover, his main focus at this time was on the Federation's well-developed news media. In the 67th year of the constitutional era, the Federation's news media and internet were bustling with activity. The presidential election, the terrorist attack on the 4 states surrounding the mountain, the epoch-making new MX Mecha, the plagiarism scandal at the Federal Academy of Science. One major event after another happened, making the reporters and broadcasters extremely excited. The citizens of the Federation were still in a daze. In the past 2 days, the news media had been paying attention to another major event. This event was related to the presidential election that was about to begin. Naturally, it attracted the attention of countless people, including Sue Lo. This was because on his list of unforgivable people, Senator Macklin was undoubtedly at the top of the list. However, he couldn't do anything about the political world, so he could only watch calmly. He wanted to see when the things that Shi Qinghai had passed to the Tai family through him would explode. However, even he didn't expect that the explosion would happen on Cabin Street, the street where the Federation's serious media gathered. From what he knew, the Tai family's influence had always been on the news department of the Federation's television station, and not on the newspapers. On a certain day in late autumn, in the Daily of the Capital Special Administrative Region, there was an inconspicuous article published behind the successive reports on the plagiarism scandal at the Federal Academy of Science. The article took up very little space, like a small piece of tofu. The plagiarism scandal had been exposed, and it had caused great damage to the election of Ross Macklin's presidential candidate. This article started from the ethics of Dean Lin Yuanhu, but it didn't fall into the trap of doubting the ethics of Ross Macklin's campaign partner. Instead, it directly pointed the spearhead at the terrorist attack on the 4 states surrounding the mountain. In this very short article, the Daily of the Capital Special Administrative Region directly accused Senator Macklin of being the mastermind behind the terrorist attack on the 4 states surrounding the mountain through detailed and simple investigation evidence, as well as unnamed sources of information. If a normal newspaper published such a shocking article, it would only be laughed at by the majority of the Federation's public. It would be treated as a snack after a meal, and they wouldn't pay attention to it at all. They would just throw it into the trash can. Senator Macklin, who advocated nonviolence for decades, resolutely broke away from the armed forces of the anti-government army and joined the democratic reconciliation process of the Federation. Was actually a terrorist? No one would believe this at all. However, the Daily of the Capital Special Administrative Region was not a normal newspaper. This was a serious newspaper that had been passed down for countless years. It was strongly liberal, and some people even regarded it as a George Carlin media outlet. It had always been respected by intellectuals and ordinary people, and had a very high authority. Such a serious newspaper made such a serious accusation, and attached to the article were the signatures of Chief Reporter Wood and Chief Editor Bob, which was enough to show the determination and confidence of the Daily of the Capital Special Administrative Region. Immediately, the vending machines on the streets of the capital were completely sold out. People hurriedly walked in the cold wind, holding a copy of the Daily of the Capital Special Administrative Region in their hands, reading it with an expression of disbelief, cursing something. Immediately afterward, the citizens of various states and regions who read the article through the electronic version of the Daily of the Capital Special Administrative Region were also shocked. Those colleagues in the news industry didn't understand why the always rigorous Daily of the Capital Special Administrative Region suddenly threw such a heavy bomb. It should be known that to accuse a well-respected presidential candidate, Chief Editor Bob, and Chief Reporter Wood, was tantamount to gambling with a lifetime of professional reputation. No, it was gambling with the reputation that the daily newspaper had accumulated over countless years. Almost at the same time the newspaper was published, the phone in the editor-in-chief's office rang. The big shot behind the newspaper roared angrily, asking Chief Editor Bob to immediately recall the newspaper and eliminate the impact immediately. "Bob, are you crazy? Every family dares to offend politicians, but do you know what you are doing? That is Medellin, at least 1 billion citizens in the Federation follow him. Countless scholars trust him, and you are saying that he is a terrorist. I know very well what I am doing." Chief Editor Bob moved the microphone a little further away and said calmly, "I know even more clearly that the Sanlin United Bank is above the board of directors, and the Lee family is supporting the election of Governor Ross and Senator Medellin. But please don't forget, I am in the newspaper business, not the bank business." The big shot on the other side of the phone panted heavily, and when he was about to say something angrily, Bob said coldly, "My chief editor contract will expire in 2 months. Don't expect to oust me at this time. Even if an interim board meeting is called, I will stay in this office. If you don't want this matter to be known by the Federation, it's best not to have this idea. You should know that there are many media outlets in the Federation that are interested in this matter. Perhaps they are more interested in why I was fired by the board of directors of the bank controlled by the Lee family the day after I published this article." After saying such a long string of awkward words in one breath, Mr. Bob's face didn't turn red, nor did he pant. Instead, he felt very happy. He held the microphone with 2 fingers and gently put it down. The click was like an old-fashioned printer in a museum. It was very crisp and moving. Many years ago, the news workers in the Federation used those printers to produce many reports that seemed crazy at the time, but were later found to be very beneficial to the future of the Federation. The President's office called and asked what we want to do. The door of the chief editor's office was pushed open, and Chief Reporter Wood, who had been secretly investigating in Area S2 for several days, walked in. The reporter shrugged and said, "There were many calls from Parliament Hill to express their concern. Tell me the truth, can you handle it?" "The Federation today can't do assassinations," Chief Editor Bob said with a smile. Only the 2 of them knew that the report accusing the Macklin papers had been written many days ago, but Chief Editor Bob had been holding it back and not publishing it. Until the recent plagiarism scandal at the Academy of Sciences was exposed, Mr. Bob smelled the wind in the Federation's political circle and made the decision to publish it. Thinking back to the argument in the chief editor's office, Wood silently looked at the white-haired chief editor and said, "I have to admit you picked the right time. At that time, I almost thought that you would throw my article in the trash can. It's not that I didn't report it, it's just that the time wasn't right." Chief Editor Bob sighed and said, "The Federation is full of scandals. If we publish it now, whether it's the government, the industry, or the public, the shock will be reduced to a minimum. After all, I don't want this article to cause unrest in the Federation. You can't smell the stench if you stay on the stinky boat all year round." Wood shrugged to show that he understood what he meant. "But if we throw it out now, won't people accuse us of flattering the weak? I'm ready to resign, and you should be ready too." Chief Editor Bob lit a thick cigarette, took 2 puffs, and said, "Then what are you afraid of? At least we have to finish this continuous report." The article on the first day of the Capital Daily News only made inferences and accusations. Everyone in the Federation knew that if they hadn't obtained the relevant evidence, such a serious newspaper would definitely not have made such accusations. There should be more detailed reports on the relevant aspects in the following days. As expected, the Capital Daily News published a follow-up report on the next day. On this day, the vending machine in the capital was robbed again. The upper class of the Federation, the ordinary citizens, and the silent readers all looked at the photos, relationship charts, and written information in the newspaper and fell into absolute shock. Chapter 269. The Capital Special District Daily's investigation report on the terrorist attack at the concert in the Mountain Ring 4 states had entered the follow-up stage. In a series of reports, there were obviously photos taken in secret, a clear organizational structure, and relevant witness testimonies all over the page. In particular, there were also relevant recordings and simple video materials uploaded on the Daily's website. The conclusion of the investigation directly pointed to Senator Macklin. The shock caused by this series of reports continued to ferment. The follow-up report on the 4th day had already turned to an accident that happened in the Lynhigh State Gymnasium on the 1st of January of the 67th year of the constitutional calendar. The Capital Daily bravely pointed out that the accident was an armed conflict that was deliberately concealed by the Federation government. An unknown target was attacked by the federal military's 2nd Military Region. In the report, The reporter pointed out that as many as 7 officers of the 2nd Military Region who participated in the spring offensive in the capital committed suicide after the related investigation. At that time, the Deputy Minister of National Defense, Yang Jingsong, was said to have died of illness. In fact, he committed suicide to avoid punishment during the internal investigation of the government. When this report came out, the entire Federation was shocked again. What kind of incident involved the military and led to the suicide of the Deputy Minister of National Defense? In the Capital Daily's report, this incident directly pointed to Senator Macklin again, but this time, the report was obviously missing a few key witnesses. The Federation's election committee asked the Daily to terminate the report on the grounds of fairness of the election. Chief Editor Bob firmly said that the report would continue even if the Supreme Court ruled. Except for the Supreme Court's ruling, the Daily report would have a serious bias towards the upcoming presidential election. The Supreme Court's cases often took several years, so the entire Federation could only watch as the Capital Daily carried out the report crazily. As for what the readers were thinking, no one knew. Due to the reputation and authority of the Capital Daily News over the years, as well as the fact that it was a George Carlinist in the first place, it was now accusing Macklin, the spokesperson of George Carlinism. Furthermore, with the secret evidence and logical inference, the credibility of the accusation was greatly increased. Many people began to doubt it. However, most people still thought that this report was purely based on the pictures and was a hysterical conspiracy theorist. The chain of evidence was very far-fetched and absurd. There were also many voices of criticism in the political and media circles. They felt that under such circumstances, the daily newspaper's report was clearly not rigorous enough. As for the young people who believed in George Carlinism, their way of expressing their attitude was much more direct. They angrily believed that this was the old stubborn forces of the Federation. They were unwilling to see Senator Medellin, who came from the 4 states and represented the bottom of society, become the vice president of the Federation. The Capital Daily News was the mouthpiece of these forces and was a shameless political lackey. Many reporters are waiting for us in the conference room. Wood glanced downstairs with a solemn expression. His gaze passed through the moon eclipse symbol and landed on the dozens of Capital University students on Cabin Street. These students had come to the newspaper office to express their protest, but it had attracted even more reporters. Senator Macklin has created a rare image in the past few decades. In the entire political circle of the Federation, perhaps only Pabre can compete with him. However, in the hearts of the young students, this disciple of St. George is the idol who can truly represent their ideals of fairness. Chief Editor Bob tidied up the documents on the table and walked with Wood to the conference room. In the past few days after the report was published, the two of them had endured a huge amount of pressure that they had never endured before in their lives. This pressure not only came from the upper echelons of the Federation, but also from the anger of the ordinary people and even the incomprehension of their families. In just a few days they looked a little haggard. The reporters in the conference room looked at the two people who walked in, exchanged glances, and then began to ask questions. Nominally, they were there to interview the protesting students, but in fact, they were more concerned about the accusations against Senator Macklin. Chief Editor Bob sat in a chair and looked around at his colleagues with a smile. He said, "If there's anything you want to ask, please ask. I used to be a reporter, so I know the torment of looking for answers." The reporters laughed, and then someone asked directly, "The pictures and recordings in the continuous report, are the sources legitimate? Where did they come from?" If this question isn't answered, I believe that the credibility of the report will be reduced a lot. The reporters wouldn't try to find the information, and the newspaper definitely wouldn't leak it. Even if they got the information, the newspaper might not dare to publish it. The young students who were protesting downstairs proved the risk of doing so. We have to protect the source of the information, but in fact it was sent. Wood answered first, everyone is familiar with the law of the press. There is no question of legality in sending materials like this. As for the related investigation in Area S2, I spent 70,000 Federation coins and hired a dozen paparazzi to dig it up. Paparazzi from the entertainment line. The reporter shook his head in disbelief. Don't underestimate the paparazzi. As long as they are willing to pay, they are more efficient than the Ministry of Justice and the Federation Bureau of Investigation combined. Wood shrugged. After a few more questions, a middle-aged man who had been silent suddenly said, "Bob, I'm not interviewing you. I just have some questions about this report, and I want to ask you." Chief Editor Bob and the reporters in the conference room all knew the middle-aged man named Wu Qima. They were very familiar with him because he was a famous hard-working reporter in the Federation. Until now, he had written countless articles that disgraced the Federation government. Since it wasn't an interview, the reporters in the conference room tacitly turned off the recording equipment in their hands and listened quietly. Wu Qima deliberated for a long time before saying, "You know what kind of person I am, but I still think that it's not appropriate for you to throw out this report before the election. In the end, I still believe in Senator Macklin. Let's not talk about the credibility of your chain of evidence based on inferences, but what do you mean by inferences? Could it be that the blonde girl in the pictures isn't Macklin's secretary? Could it be that the guy in the foundation didn't explain what he did?" Wood angrily waved the newspaper in his hand. "But these people are all dead." Wu Qima frowned and said, "And I don't want to argue about this. I'm just thinking, if Senator Macklin is the mastermind behind this, why would he do this? Whether it's the reported assassination in Linhai or the terrorist attack in the four mountainous states, what good would it do for him, who still has a strong anti-government attitude? Destroying the reconciliation agreement and atmosphere of the Federation, using those deaths to divide the people of the Federation into two political groups. Senator Macklin is definitely a mature politician. He wouldn't be unaware that this is not good for his path to the election. Moreover, during the terrorist attack, he was at the scene and almost died. The more opposite the Federation's political groups are, the more his anti-government attitude is a burden, not a layer of glory." Chief Editor Bob listened quietly, and the reporters in the entire conference room were also very quiet. Everyone was a reporter who ran the political line, so they were naturally sensitive in this regard. Naturally, they were very clear that Wu Qima's analysis was very reasonable. After all, Senator Macklin couldn't find the motive for doing these things. In fact, Su Lo had thought about the question of motive a long time ago. Lady Tai had also thought about it. Even Lin Banshan had also thought about it in the grass beside the high-speed railway. However, these people, or people with great wisdom, couldn't guess what Macklin was thinking and couldn't find the reason for him to do this. After Wu Qima finished speaking, Bob was silent for a moment and said, "I also want to find the motive for him to do this, but I can't find it. However, I know one thing better. As a journalist, we only need to find the facts and tell the fact. The motive behind the facts is a problem that needs to be considered by the prosecutor." He raised his head, looked directly at the reporters in the conference room, and said calmly, "The newspaper won't convict a person. It will only tell the citizens of the Federation what the people around that person have done. As for whether they are guilty or not, the readers will have their own judgment in their hearts." Wu Qima didn't give up. He shook his head and said, "But your inference, the style of your writing when you are narrating the so-called facts, has already shown your inclination. You have already made a moral judgment, and this is not right. The news is actually the opinion of the person who writes the news. I admit that Wood and I have our own judgment. We have been using it cautiously, including in this report," Bob said. After the reporters dispersed, Wu Qima stayed and drank a cup of coffee in the chief editor's office. He looked at Bob and said seriously, "We have known each other for decades. What you said before could convince those young people, but it couldn't convince me. The newspaper's inclination is too serious. You convicted Senator Macklin in advance, and then you came to find evidence. Cautious? I think what you said about being cautious is a joke. It is indeed not cautious enough, but you have to be clear about the current time period. Bob stared into his eyes and said, "Such a person is about to be elected as the Federation's vice president. If he is really the person behind the scenes, the entire Federation will pay a heavy price for my caution. At that time, it will be a real joke. So you have the power to use the public opinion in your hands to pull him down?" Wu Qima put down the coffee cup and asked angrily. "You have seen our report, so you should have your own judgment. Do you think Macklin is guilty or not?" Bob looked at him coldly. Wu Qima was silent for a long time before he shook his head and said, "I don't know. Maybe I just don't want to see two positive figures in the political world, but they have deceived most people, including me. Whether he is guilty or not, it is a matter for the Ministry of Justice to investigate." Bob frowned and said, "And I don't think that these few reports can make Macklin lose this election. When Governor Ross was in charge of Jingzhou, the economy of Harbor City dazzled the entire Federation. Coupled with Macklin in the background of the Great Reconciliation, their chances of winning are really high." "You support Pabre?" "I didn't plan to vote this year," Wu Qima asked. "I support this." Bob patted his left chest. Chapter 270. The shock caused by the Capital Daily News was still being amplified in countless galaxies in the Federation. That night, the last TV debate before the presidential election was broadcasted on the Federation's TV channel as scheduled. As early as 2 months ago, in the middle of the election process, several candidates who were far behind in public opinion had already announced their withdrawal and called on their few supporters to vote for the other two candidates. At 8 o'clock in the evening, Su Lu, who had not been assigned any work or received any transfer orders, sat quietly on the sofa alone and watched the TV screen intently. The news that Uncle Feng Yu was still alive made him happy for a long time, but when he thought about which corner of the universe that guy was wandering, he had no choice but to give up the strong urge to find him. The most important content of his life these days was to pay attention to the progress of the Federation's presidential election. He defeated Lin Yuanhu, which indirectly and deeply affected this election. At least, many people who originally supported Ross Medellin because of Lin Yuanhu's call had already fallen silent. However, his strength was ultimately in technology. He had done what he needed to do, and the information that Mr. Schur obtained after narrowly escaping death had also begun to come into play. All he could do now was wait for the results of the election and wait for the Federation's judicial system to intervene. On the TV debate, the dark-skinned Senator Pabre did not mention the recent plagiarism controversy at all, nor did he use the continuous reports in the Capital Daily News to make an issue of it. He chose a senior member of the Federation Management Committee as his partner. The two of them sat in the specially arranged venue of the Federation's TV station and described their governing program and reform plans for the Federation in a deep voice. The expected fierce debate did not happen, but the four candidates still performed extremely well with their eloquence and calm demeanor. Pabre, who was a lawyer, was originally a famous orator in the Federation. Since he stepped into politics, every speech he made was considered a model by campaign experts. Senator Medellin was an even more outstanding politician. Whether it was a long time ago or in the recent 2 years, his articles published in the Capital Daily News were read by countless people. Su Lu watched the TV debate end and felt a little bored. Just as he was preparing to practice diligently like he had done countless nights in the past, the remote control subconsciously changed to another channel. This channel was playing a campaign advertisement for Ross Medellin. At this time, it had just used detailed data to describe Governor Ross's absolute economic control and was talking about Senator Medellin's life. Looking at the old photo on the TV screen, the innocent child, Su Li's eyes narrowed. The first work of the masters of art and literature was their diapers, and a peerless villain like Medellin also had an innocent past. In the 16th year of the 37th constitutional era, the first imperial invasion ended and the Federation won. The S2 heavy industry fell from its wartime status and countless workers lost their jobs. His parents were kicked out of the factory apartment and he had to work to support them. In the 23rd year of the constitutional era, his mother passed away. He joined the Federation Expeditionary Force and received a Purple Star Medal. But he was expelled from the army because he did not carry out the withdrawal order of the army commander. In the 27th year of the constitutional era, his business failed and his father passed away. With an unexpected financial aid, he entered the School of History and Economics of the Capital University. Later, a person named George Carlin appeared in this school. In the 31st year of the constitutional era, because he participated in the activities of the Veterans Association to occupy Charter Square, he was expelled from the Capitol Purge and was accused by the Federation. In the 32nd year of the constitutional era, he signed a plea agreement and returned to the S2 area to open a store. He got engaged, but less than 2 months later, his fiancée died and his heart was broken. In the 33rd year of the constitutional era, the store went bankrupt again. He had a complete mental breakdown and was bedridden for 6 months. In the 34th year of the constitutional era, he participated in the election of the third-class city councilor, but did not obtain enough signatures, so he was not included in the nomination list. In the 35th year of the constitutional era, he entered the Green Dragon Mountain alone and joined a guerrilla group. But he was suspected of being a spy of the Federation Investigation Bureau and was imprisoned in a single cell for 10 months. In the 36th year of the constitutional era, he tried to become the spokesperson of the anti-government army, but failed. In the 37th year of the constitutional era, because of the internal strife of the anti-government army, he was only 3 minutes away from death. In the 41st year of the constitutional era, he was successfully elected as an alternate member of the Anti-Government Army Committee. In the 43rd year of the constitutional era, he fought for a by-election in the first half of the year, but failed. In the 47th year of the constitutional era, he was re-elected as a member of the Anti-Government Army Committee and has been re-elected ever since. In the 51st year of the constitutional era, he proposed nonviolence, but was attacked by an assassination at the Green Dragon Mountain Airport. The investigation has not yet concluded. He was seriously injured and recuperated for 2 years. In the 54th year of the constitutional era, he represented the anti-government army and participated in the election of the 4 states surrounding the mountain for the first time, but failed. In the 58th year of the constitutional era, he succeeded in the election of the 4 states surrounding the mountain, but was disqualified by the Federation Election Committee because he violated the plea agreement signed with the Federation that year. In the 59th year of the constitutional era, he came to S1 to report to the Federation High Court and asked for the right to be elected fairly. In the 60th year of the constitutional era, the High Court ruled that the election 2 years ago was valid, and he was successfully elected as a state senator of the Federation for the first time. He was born with nothing and faced setbacks throughout his life. He could have become a hero respected by the federal military, but because of his hatred of the invaders, he lost this honor. He could have become a scholar in a university, but because of his thinking about the unfairness of the Federation Society, he was exiled to the edge of society. Countless elections, countless failures, 2 business failures, the tragic death of his fiancée, countless times on the verge of despair, but he did not give up, because he knew what he wanted to do for the Federation. That was why he was finally elected as a member of the Federation Management Committee and became a candidate for the vice presidency of the Federation. He is Senator Medellin, and whether he succeeds or fails this time is in your hands. This is a story that originated from Lincoln's resume. I forgot who the original author was, but I feel that it is very appropriate and beautiful to use here. Thank you. This was a very exciting campaign advertisement. Sue Lu was a little entranced by it. These legendary life experiences, as well as the compassion hidden in the words, perfectly displayed Senator Medellin's life. In comparison, the campaign advertisement for Senator Pobre's campaign office was much more dull. Looking at the face of the innocent baby turned into a calm and gentle old man on the TV, Sue Lu licked his dry lips. He had done a lot of homework on this high and mighty politician, so he easily guessed that this campaign announcement must have been written by Medellin himself. At the moment when George Carlinism was prevalent, in an environment of great reconciliation in the Federation, Medellin's life was indeed a perfect role model in the hearts of voters. Sue Lu even believed that if it was not for the old political system of the Federation that needed to be appeased, the positions of Medellin and Ross would have been reversed. After the campaign advertisement ended, there was no new advertisement. This TV station actually began to broadcast an investigation report that accused Medellin of being involved in a terrorist attack. Sue Lu looked at the unfamiliar anchor with a serious expression, and then at the bloody and terrifying images of the concert on the TV. He was so shocked that he could not speak. Then, he clenched his fist tightly and waved it vigorously. The Federation TV station absolutely could not broadcast such things, because the election committee would definitely not agree. However, such a private TV station could not be controlled by anyone. The accusation against Medellin developed from the newspaper to the TV station. The vivid images, together with the recorded evidence and vague video evidence, suddenly became very lethal. For Sue Lu, the addition of more news media was like a spring breeze blowing overnight. All the flowers in the pear garden bloomed, comforting and looking forward to it. However, for most of the citizens and politicians in the Federation, these reports were like a bone-piercing cold wind. The thunder in South Dakota in summer made them feel somewhat frightened and uneasy. Regardless of whether it was the Capital Daily News or the TV station that was not very famous, they made serious accusations through their own channels. Although the evidence available was not enough, it was already somewhat shocking. Under the pressure of the media and the influence of the Tai family in every corner of the Federation, in the last days of autumn in the 67th year of the constitutional calendar, the Federation Management Committee finally approved the Ministry of Justice's application to establish an independent prosecutor for the Medellin case. In fact, the Ministry of Justice had already received the same report as the Capital Daily News 2 months ago. The secret investigation of Senator Medellin had also been carried out to a certain extent. However, without the authorization of the Parliament Hill, it was extremely difficult to carry out the investigation. Since then, the candidate for the independent prosecutor appointed by the Ministry of Justice had also been revealed. For the past 2 months, the secret investigation team of the Ministry of Justice had felt like they were unable to act freely. Now that they finally stood in front of the stage, they immediately began to work. In a very short period of time, they controlled the target they needed and began to retrieve the call records and internal documents of Senator Medellin's office. Inspector Xiao Wenjing had a serious expression as he led a few colleagues into the Parliament Hill. Under the gaze of the crowd, while waiting for the elevator, he said softly to Su Songzi behind him, "Teacher is under a lot of pressure as an independent prosecutor. We have to be careful when handling cases." Su Songzi nodded. Just yesterday, she had received a transfer order from the Internal Affairs Department of the Ministry of Defense to assist the Ministry of Justice's investigation work. Being able to participate in such a big case, this outstanding judicial talent also felt unprecedented pressure. However, they were professionals who defended the justice of the Federation. Although they knew that Senator Medellin had the support of countless powerful political figures and surging public opinion behind him, they still stepped into the Parliament Hill. Countless reporters swarmed up and waited at the bottom of the long stone steps of the Parliament Hill. Perhaps it would take many days, but they would not miss a single second of the shocking investigation process of the entire Federation. At this time, no one noticed that a black car without a logo slowly drove over and quietly parked by the lawn. It was like a spectator sitting in his seat. Chapter 271. No one could go against the entire Federation, not even the legendary 7 great families, not even the powerful political figures. Once the will of the Federation was expressed through a specific organization, powerful efficiency and terrifying power would descend upon the world. The investigation of the Ministry of Justice did not have the cooperation of the Bureau of Proclamation, but tens of thousands of Federation Bureau of Investigation agents and secret agents of the Ministry of Justice spread out like ants. They followed the paths that Senator Macklin had taken and the places that he had been to, and began to investigate the suspicious points in the evidence. The investigation process was very smooth and did not take long. The suspicious points found and the evidence sent by the mysterious person were enough to support many conclusions. When the 70-centimeter thick case file was sent to the Hall of Parliament Hill, even the most stubborn senator and the strongest supporter of that side had no choice but to agree to the President's request for an emergency meeting. In this emergency meeting of the Federation Management Committee, the Minister of Justice and the independent prosecutor from the 1st Military Academy gave a detailed explanation of the situation, and at the same time, expressed the seriousness of the situation. After an intense debate and even cursing, the Parliament finally voted to temporarily strip Senator Macklin of his judicial jurisdiction with a very narrow margin. As Senator Macklin was still a candidate for the presidential election, he still needed the signature of the Supreme Judge of the Federation Court. When all these procedures were completed, it was already 2:00 in the morning. Parliament Hill in the middle of the night was not as solemn and peaceful as usual. It was filled with shouting crowds. Under the cold gaze of the huge statue in Charter Square in the distance, Senator Macklin's supporters held George Carlin's portrait and Senator Macklin's portrait in their hands. They shouted and cursed with all their might, and gave the riot police in front of them the middle finger. The bottom of Parliament Hill was divided into 3 areas according to the long stone step. On the other side were Senator Pabre's supporters who believed that Macklin was a terrorist. They held the photos of the innocent victims of the terrorist attacks around the mountain and shouted in that direction without showing any signs of weakness. At the same time, the prosecutors of the Ministry of Justice, who quietly walked along the stone steps, applauded enthusiastically. However, these people were much fewer in number, but the huge pictures in their hands were emitting a stiff and cold aura, especially one of them. It was a picture of a little girl watching a concert with her eyes closed under a cold stone. Dust covered her face, and the blood on her face had also coagulated. Xiao Wenjing and Su Songzi led more than a dozen officials from the Ministry of Justice into Parliament Hill. They had been to the highest legislative building in the Federation many times over the past few days. Their initial nervousness and excitement had long turned into calmness and joy after obtaining a clue. However, it was clear that there were many more people demonstrating today than usual. The flashing lights on both sides were particularly dazzling, probably because the news had leaked out. On the street beside the lawn, a black car was parked there quietly. Su Lu lit a cigarette and took a light puff. Through the car's surveillance system, he watched the lively scene in the distant Parliament Hill. Finally, his gaze fell on the picture of the little girl. His fingers trembled as he held the cigarette, and he immediately aimed the image on the screen at the entrance of Parliament Hill. Whether it was the Department of Defense or the nutshell maneuver, it seemed to be a little difficult for them to deal with a meritorious subject like him. Therefore, he simply did not go to work at the Whitewater Company these days. Instead, he came to Parliament Hill every day. Being able to see Macklin brought to justice as soon as possible was what he looked forward to the most. When he discovered that Xiao Wenjing and Su Songzi were actually members of the investigation team of the Ministry of Justice, he could not help but be a little surprised. Then, he felt a sense of admiration in his heart. Not long after, the officials of the Ministry of Justice walked out of Parliament Hill. In the middle of the crowd, Senator Macklin, who was wearing a grey windbreaker, looked as usual and did not appear to be dispirited. The flashing lights immediately lit up half the night sky. Under the artificial light, the statues on the pillars of the Parliament Hill appeared lifelike and exceptionally ferocious. Senator Macklin was escorted down the stone step. A few special official vehicles were waiting to take him to the Ministry of Justice for investigation. When the people at the bottom of the stone steps saw this scene, their emotions suddenly reached a peak. Countless supporters chanted the old man's name, sobbing as they scolded the shamelessness of the government. On the other hand, there were fewer people in the crowd, and they angrily shouted terms like murderer, baby killer, hypocrite, and so on. There was no expression on Senator Macklin's face. His footsteps were still steady, and his aged face was still calm and confident. He waved at the people who supported him to express his gratitude. "Senator Macklin, do you have anything to say?" The reporters who were stopped outside the safety zone shouted loudly as they pressed their shutters with all their might. Senator Macklin stopped in his tracks, smiled, and then raised his hands. The Ministry of Justice was not stupid enough to handcuff him. There was not even a plastic rope around his hands outside the sleeves of his windbreaker. "I've been handcuffed many times in my life, but I proved that I was right every time and came back safely." The Parliament Hill became a little quieter. Senator Macklin raised his hands with a smile and said, "However, today proved that the Federation is still full of invisible handcuffs everywhere. I don't want the Federation to fall into some kind of divisive mood because of this incident." Senator Macklin said loudly to the reporters and the people who supported him, "Go back, at least history will give its right judgment." Only history had the right to give its judgment. What about the law of the Federation? These few words of Senator Macklin vaguely revealed some kind of emotion in his heart. Suddenly, it infected the expressions of the supporters, and a sense of sadness grew in their hearts. Even the reporters momentarily forgot what they were supposed to ask. At this moment, the chief political reporter of the Capital Daily News, Wood, suddenly shouted at Macklin, who was on the stone steps, "The moral court in your heart has already sentenced you to death." Senator Macklin looked at the reporter who threw him down, smiled slightly, and did not say anything. Inspector Xiao Wenjing, who was next to him holding his arm, stiffened slightly. She remembered that the sentence that reporter Wood said was the focus of the last of the 17 editorials that Senator Macklin published in the Daily News. The angry people began to throw paper balls and spit at Wood. The scene was chaotic. A few special official vehicles, under the protection of the riot police, slowly drove away from Parliament Hill. Su Lu turned off the remote monitoring screen and silently finished the last puff of his cigarette. He thought about the crowd and the angry young people just now. He thought about how even Zhou Yingxing did not believe that Macklin would do such a shameless thing at the beginning. He suddenly understood why he was unwilling to forgive Lin Yuanhu in the Milky Way public cemetery. It was because he knew very well that people like Macklin and Lin Yuanhu were the best, but also the most disgusting actors. Professor Shen once said that there was no such thing as reason in the universe. However, the major events that happened one after another in the Federation in the past 6 months seemed to prove that reason still existed, at least in the hearts of some people. Because of this understanding, because of the news that Uncle Feng Yu was still alive, Su Lu, who seemed to have been forgotten by many people, was very happy to be a spectator in a drama. He watched as murderers and arsonists were sent to court, and bridge builders and pavers were at ease underground. However, the development of the situation was out of his expectations. On the day that Senator Macklin was invited by the Ministry of Justice to investigate, demonstrations broke out in countless cities in the capital ring. The ordinary citizens of the Federation, who would never fully understand the dark side of politics, as usual, regarded Senator Macklin's case as one of the countless dark sides of the Federation. The thoughts of the people were very simple, very simple. Macklin, who came from S2, was an outsider in the political system of the Federation. He was a weakling, and he had no motive to commit such evil acts. Therefore, in the hearts of the people, Senator Macklin was definitely a victim, and the accusation by the Ministry of Justice was just a shameless plot by some big shots. Senator Macklin had worked tirelessly over the years to preach his non-violent views, creating an extremely perfect political image for him. Coupled with the cries of the fanatical and loyal George Carlin activists, countless people of the Federation began to take to the streets in solidarity with the senator who had been deprived of judicial jurisdiction, especially in the university town of Linhai. Most of the students joined the demonstration, causing a large number of suspension of classes. The next night, as Senator Macklin's campaign partner, Governor Ross, held a press conference. In the press conference, he expressed his absolute trust and strong support for Senator Macklin's ethic. He angrily and discontentedly accused the government of the Federation of playing an extremely dishonorable role in this matter. He also stated that he would not rule out revealing some ugly truths at the appropriate time. He asked the Ministry of Justice to immediately release Senator Macklin and sincerely apologize. At the same time, he announced that the campaign office had submitted a letter to the court, accusing the Capital Daily and a private television station of spreading false information, endangering public safety, defamation, and bribery of journalists. As an experienced politician who had controlled the largest city in the Federation for many years, the counterattack of Governor Ross of Jingzhou was definitely not just a press conference. Just after the press conference, several of the most famous business people in the Federation also began to stand up, expressing their distrust of the Ministry of Justice and their support for Senator Macklin. A large number of influential organizations, such as the Federation Financial Association, the Mining Association, and a large number of far-reaching organizations also expressed their attitude. In the next 10 hours, more powerful people stood up to support Senator Macklin. 17 professors of the Capital University signed an open letter, and the Academic Committee of the Federation also expressed their concern. More media also began to stand on the side of the people who were protesting, waving flags and cheering for them. They felt that it was unimaginable and unbearable for such a blatant act to happen on this day of the 37th Constitution. Chapter 272. Su Le watched the scene on the news and could not help but shake his head, cursing under his breath. He could never have imagined that the usually silent Federation citizens would actually have so many people standing up this time. Moreover, the Federation Academic Committee actually had the face to express concern. This was truly incomprehensible to him. After squatting for an hour in the horse stance, silently practicing those close combat stances several times in the Wangdu apartment, every inch of his muscles and joints were stretched. However, he was no longer in pain like he had been in the Eastwood district all those years ago. Instead, the slight soreness and numbness felt very comfortable. The power in his body was like a scorching hot line, moving through his body. It no longer made his muscles and skin tremble. In the 67th year of the constitutional calendar, he was still persisting in his training, steadily advancing towards the path of becoming the #1 machine that Uncle Feng Yu had spoken of. However, there were too many things to handle after all. The development of the MX Mecha and many other matters distracted him. His progress had been stagnant, and there was even a faint possibility that it might regress. And after that battle at the peak of Kaki Peak a few days ago, under the pressure of Madman Li's powerful and terrifying strength, Su Lu had been stimulated by a certain emotion. He had a general understanding that whether it was in Federation society or the military, in the end, Individual ability was the most important factor. When the situation or social system could not help every individual citizen, they could only rely on themselves. After taking a cold shower, he sat back on the sofa and began to watch the news again. This feeling in his heart grew stronger and stronger. In the past few hours, countless unexpected events had happened in the Federation. Like interstellar dust at the core of a galaxy, they constantly changed angles and colors, making the hundreds of millions of Federation citizens unable to take it all in. They were dazzled and frightened. Senator Macklin was being investigated by the Ministry of Justice. The public gathering outside the Ministry of Justice building had also been going on for a long time. It was already late at night, and candles were densely arranged on both sides of the street. Tens of thousands of supporters used silence to express their dissatisfaction with the government and their distrust of the Federation's judicial system. The lawn outside the Justice Department building had even been turned into a temporary command center by Ross Medlin's campaign office. Countless reporters had gathered there, and their cameras faithfully transmitted the images to every TV screen in every home. Governor Ross stood on a makeshift stage and waved his arms vigorously as he expressed his angry opinion. At the same time, he strongly urged his election opponent, Senator Pabre, to stop maintaining his hypocritical silence and stand up bravely to debate with him. Governor Ross's speech was interrupted by the applause of his supporters. At the end of the road, there was another group of people shouting slogans to punish the murderer, but their voices were so far away and soft. The news footage changed to the 4 mountain estates of Region S2. The former heavy industrial base of the Federation was where Senator Medellin made his fortune. His reputation here was unparalleled. However, for some unknown reason, after Senator Medellin was taken away by the Ministry of Justice, hundreds of millions of industrial workers remained silent. No one knew what was at work here. But tonight, the silence of the 4 mountain estates was finally broken. The workers of the 23rd Heavy Machinery Production Base of the Federation were the first to walk out of the factory. Soon after, more workers walked out of the factory and onto the street. The 4 mountain estates strike had thus begun. Whether it was Shi Qinghai, who was hiding in the dark, or the madam of the Tai family, or the senior officials of the Federation government, none of them had expected that the Federation, which had been peaceful for many years, would become chaotic just like that. Su Lu narrowed his eyes and looked at the dense crowd on the news. He thought of Zhang Xiaomeng's unswerving loyalty to Senator Medellin. He knew that the old man had an outstanding ability to win people's hearts, and he suddenly felt uneasy. Li Xiuzhu had never believed the investigation conclusion of the Ministry of Justice. As a behind-the-scenes supporter of Ross Medellin's campaign, he had met Senator Medellin several times at fundraising parties. He had a very good impression of the senator, so good that he almost forgot that he had an anti-government background. He thought that Senator Medellin was an extremely mature politician. How could he do crazy things that wouldn't benefit his career at all? Those who supported Councillor Macklin had created a huge commotion in a very short period of time. It was definitely not just because of Councillor Macklin's reputation, but also because of the influence of the forces led by the iron schemer in the business world. Even so, when Li Xiuzhu heard about the 4 mountain estates strike, he was still a bit shocked. He felt more and more that his decision to invest in Ross Medellin on behalf of his family was a wise decision. Standing on the top floor of the Sanlin United Bank headquarters, Li Xiuzhu's handsome face flashed with a relaxed smile as he looked at the candlelight on the street in the distance through the glass curtain wall. People's hearts were not something that could be bought with money. At this moment, the phone beside him rang. Li Xiuzhu held the phone and said respectfully, "Father, according to the internal information from the Ministry of Justice, they will probably be unable to withstand the pressure from all sides very soon. The senator will be released soon, and will only be put under house surveillance." The head of the Lee family on the other end of the phone said softly with a hoarse voice, "Senator Medellin has always been deepening his influence among the younger generation of the Federation. He has considered himself as George Carlin's successor. He has been doing this for more than 10 years, and finally, there are results. Those fanatical young people will naturally do anything to follow him. But do you think this situation is the same as what we originally expected? I don't know where the Ministry of Justice got these messy materials, but it is very clear that the madam is adding fuel to the fire. Otherwise, the Parliament wouldn't have taken away Senator Medellin's judicial jurisdiction so quickly." Li Xiaozhu said calmly, "I admit that I underestimated the Tai family's influence and determination, but the situation is still under control." The other end of the phone was silent for a long time. Then, the head of the Li family slowly said, "Idiot, come back immediately. At this time, you still can't see that the situation is already out of control. What is in your stinky skin? If the madam is determined to solve this situation, do you think that those foolish people who are marching can go against her?" Li Xiaozhu held the phone and remained silent. He had a strange expression on his face. He didn't know where the problem was. The Federation government killed George Carlin. We can't let them kill Senator Medellin. At this time, I think that all the citizens of the Federation should stand up and express their position. I don't want to vote at all in this year's election. I even leaned towards Senator Pabre, but the actions of the Ministry of Justice this time have disappointed me. How can the politics of the Federation be so dirty? In the news, the reporters randomly interviewed the people who were marching at the Ministry of Justice building and Linhai University. Those ordinary people's answers were very emotional. The situation is a bit out of control. Lady Tai lightly rubbed her forehead and said slowly, "That useless person from the Li family still can't see the danger. The 4 states around the mountains have already gone on strike. If this continues, the society will be in chaos, and the Federation will be the one to suffer." The 7 major families lived in the Federation and coexisted with the Federation. If the Federation was in trouble, then the 7 major families would be in trouble. These important people hidden in the shadows of history would coldly and cruelly fight for each other's benefit. However, they would definitely not allow this kind of fight to bring unpredictable risks to their benefits. In the room, Secretary Shun quietly listened to the madam's words. At the same time, he quickly browsed through the feedback from the various departments of the Tai family. "In the end," he said softly, "the Ministry of Justice will remove the enforcement measures tomorrow morning. Senator Medellin will be put under house surveillance." Lady Tai shook her head indifferently and said, "Medellin won't come out. He's an old gambler. He bet all of his decades of influence on this case. He didn't even hesitate to let the social and political races go against each other and cause chaos just to seek a reversal of victory. The latest public support rate is out. Ross Medellin is only 1 percentage point away from Mr. Pabre," Secretary Shin reported. "Why is Medellin so desperate? He should know that if this continues, the Federation's fundamental interests will be damaged. He won't have any good result." Madame Tai closed her eyes and thought. A person like her knew very well that the young people in Senator Macklin's office had played a role in the protests that had spread across the Capitol ring. The Li family should stop very soon. They are not idiot. No family can bear the loss of the strike in the 4-state. Maybe Senator Medellin just wants fame? Secretary Shen tried to give an opinion. Lady Tai opened her eyes. After thinking for a while, she shook her head and said, "I just can't figure out what this old fox wants. That's why I'm so cautious." Lady Tai said coldly, "Medellin started a fire in the Federation. No one knows how big this fire will burn. I'm afraid he can't control it even now. But I don't know if he doesn't want to control it. If it's the latter, then he really should die. No matter what he wants, we must extinguish all of his hopes and force him to withdraw from this election. We must have his cooperation to quell the Federation's uneasiness. Lady Tai turned to Butler Jean beside her and said, "You've been in contact with the people in the mountains. When will the witnesses that the leader of Nanshui promised arrive?" Butler Jean lowered his head and replied, "Tomorrow morning at 9:23. At 8 o'clock a.m. The next day, Inspector Xiao Wenjing walked into the room. He had been having trouble sleeping for the past few days. His eyes were deeply sunken. When he looked at the energetic and calm senator by the window, although he hated this person's hypocrisy, he couldn't help but admire his shrewdness. Senator Medellin smiled and refused to leave the Ministry of Justice's notice. He chose to stay here and watch as the entire Federation surged because of him. Chapter 273. Outside the window, the wind was surging, but his heart was calm. Senator Macklin stood by the window and looked at his supporters on the lawn. His slightly aged face was incomparably peaceful. His political life, and even his life, might come to an end after this incident, but he had no intention of backing down. In the entire Federation, except for himself, no one could understand the persistence in his heart. In the eyes of the Federation politicians, that madam, and the head of the Li family, he did not hesitate to provoke the opposition of the Federation society and stubbornly refused to back down. It was really a crazy move, but he was going to continue like this unless the situation changed again. A few months ago, Senator Macklin felt that there were some problems around him. In the network of subordinates that he had been managing for a long time, some dangerous person seemed to have found some gap. The death of one of his capable subordinates made him directly use the young people who had been following him for a long time, including Helen's secretary, as sacrificial objects in the concert attack. However, even so, the matter was not over, because after the incident, another subordinate mysteriously disappeared, and was still not found to this day. Senator Macklin could not have known that his subordinate had already become a dry corpse in the ocean. He also could not have thought that the person who found so much evidence of his crimes was just a person who walked on the edge of the Federation's darkness. However, many years ago, he was mentally prepared for his own ending. In fact, he had never imagined that he could face the powerful Federation head-on with the power that he had discovered among the young people in the 4 states around the mountains. 60 years in a foreign land, when did I not miss my family for a moment? Not many wrong paths in the galaxy, I offer my body to the light. Senator Macklin silently recited this ancient poem in his heart, thinking that this life was enough. Outside the door, Inspector Xiao Wenjing said to a middle-aged man, "Just now, he received a few calls. We did not listen in, but it should be some forces persuading him to temporarily leave the Ministry of Justice so that the situation outside can be calmer." But for some reason, Macklin directly refused. The middle-aged man was none other than Brigiosi, an independent investigator secretly established by the Ministry of Justice and recently approved by Parliament Hill. He was a respected senior law professor of the First Military Academy, but this time, he was in charge of investigating a candidate for the vice president, a politician deeply supported by the lower class of the Federation. He still felt endless pressure. Mr. Bugliassi looked at the crowd outside the window, who had stayed up all night. He smiled and pushed open the door and walked in. Mr. Bugliassi put these unexpected difficulties behind him. Senator Macklin turned around and said with a gentle smile, "Hello, Mr. Inspector. This is the first time we've met, but please don't persuade me to leave. I won't leave before the Department of Justice has cleared my name and formally apologized to me." Officer Briossi looked at him quietly. After a long time, he said in a rather playful tone, "Mr. Senator, you don't have to leave. In fact, we will have many more opportunities to meet in the future. I'm here to inform you that a special hearing will be held on Parliament Hill soon. A key witness will point out your role in the Linhai State Gymnasium assassination in front of the senators. Senator Macklin's eyes slowly narrowed. It only took him a short time to remember that girl, the girl who liked sex, the girl he had personally trained for a year, the girl who should have been dead. The sun at 8 or 9 in the morning shone over the Capital Special District. The magnificent building on Parliament Hill had a long shadow that extended all the way to the back of Green Mountain, covering the green trees and morning birds there. The straight pool and lawn in front of the Parliament Hill were extremely neat. White pigeons walked in between, pecking at the grains thrown by people. Senator Macklin was being interrogated in the Ministry of Justice building, and the protesters were also gathered in that direction. The sacred Parliament Hill of the Federation should have welcomed its own tranquility, but at this time, the long stone steps were already surrounded by reporters who had heard the news. The Parliament Hill hearing procedure was a very complicated matter. However, the madam behind the scenes and the big shots in the Federation had forcibly simplified the procedure to the extreme. Even the most well-informed senators only found out about the news in the middle of the night. More senators cancelled their trips at the last minute and rushed to the Parliament Hill. However, when they thought of the seriousness of the matter, no one raised any objections to the holding of the hearing. The reporters who had heard the news were only a few minutes late. The broadcast vans of the major TV stations in the Federation were already on standby, ready to broadcast at any time. However, in order to win the right to broadcast in the Parliament Hill, who knew how many rounds of requests and torment they had to go through to win the right to broadcast in the Parliament Hill? At 11:30, when it was almost time for lunch, the old senator from South Dakota finally rushed back on a special plane. The Parliament Hill had the necessary number of people, and the hearing on the charges against Senator Macklin was officially held. The 5 huge circular stone pillars on the Parliament Hill were incomparably grand and magnificent. The interior of the meeting hall was even more spacious. The dark wood decorations, the huge lamp that hung dozens of meters in the air, the arc-shaped rows of senators' seats, and the quiet atmosphere filled the Federation's highest legislative meeting place with a dignified and authoritative atmosphere. Zhang Xiaoming, who was wearing a bra, walked in through the side passage of the Parliament Hill under the guidance of an official from the Ministry of Justice. She wore light-colored boots, plain clothes, and short hair that reached her ears. She looked extremely capable. Seeing that this witness was a young lady who had an uncomfortable feeling about her, the senators who were leading the Federation's direction were slightly startled. After that, they began to discuss softly. The dignified feeling in the air made Zhang Xiaoming, who was entering the Parliament Hill for the first time, feel a little nervous. However, she immediately took a deep breath and nodded to the senators closest to her with a calm expression. At the same time, she subconsciously glanced at the camera lens fixed on the passage. The 3 TV stations of the Federation had obtained the right to broadcast live. Everything that happened in the hearing would be transmitted to every TV screen through wireless signals. Zhang Xiaoming gently clenched her fists, trying to make her footsteps more steady. However, she silently thought that since she had returned to S1 once again, Lin Hai's parents should have seen her. He should have seen her as well. Her heels stepped on the expensive mahogany floor, making a steady rhythm in the quiet and spacious Parliament Hall. The official from the Ministry of Justice stopped below, and the Parliament's protocol officer led her to the table on the right side of the rostrum. Zhang Xiaoming stood behind the semicircular podium and turned around to face the hundreds of senators in the Parliament Hill. The seats of the councillors were like countless arcs that extended upwards. Every seat was extremely far apart, and there were countless seats that were not filled. In the interior of this magnificent building, everyone seemed so small. She also had this feeling, especially when she saw the most famous politicians of the Federation staring at her with hawk-like eyes. She was a little flustered. "Please place your hand on the Magna Carta and recite the oath after me." The Parliament's protocol officer stood below the mahogany podium and said softly. He was a few heads shorter than her. Zhang Xiaoming took a few deep breaths and placed her hand on the Magna Carta. This was a thick book about 50 centimeters wide and 1 meter long. It recorded the first charter of the Federation and several of the most important amendments. It was the creed that every citizen of the Federation had to abide by. After she placed her hand on the book, the first thing she felt was that this book was very thick. She did not know what material the book cover was made of, but it was a little cold. The people under the protection of the Magna Carta enjoy freedom and equality. Zhang Xiaoming followed and recited softly, I swear to the Magna Carta that I will tell the truth to the best of my knowledge without hiding anything. At first, her voice was very soft, and it was not very clear in the quiet Parliament Hill. The few senators sitting behind the stepped seats frowned. But then Zhang Xiaoming's voice became louder and louder, clearer and clearer. She was used to this kind of solemn and depressing environment. She understood that these powerful big shots in the Federation were actually just the resident bugs of the Federation that her comrades in the mountains wanted to eliminate. In that case, the dizzying seats of the senators in the magnificent building were actually no different from the densely packed holes that termites had dug out in the soil. After experiencing the betrayal, and seeing the pain, poverty, sacrifice, and corpses, the Zhang Xiaoming of today was no longer the innocent and kind girl from a year ago. She calmly finished reciting the oath and then calmly waited for the senators to ask her questions. The host of today's special hearing was the chairman of the Ethics Committee of the Federation Management Committee, the senior senator from S3, Shaun. The old man glanced at the woman on the stage with cloudy eyes and asked coldly, Your name? Zhang Xiaoming, she answered clearly. You used to be a secret staff member in Senator Medellin's office? Yes. But according to the report, you should have died in a sailing accident in Region S2 in the first half of the year. That was a conspiracy. I am still alive. I am standing in front of all the senators now to reveal this conspiracy to you. This was not a court trial, but it was colder than a court trial. At this time, the senators had already received the specific questions and the scope of the hearing. As the anti-government girl from the Green Dragon Mountain on the stage answered in a very organized manner, the solemn Parliament Hill gradually fell into silence. This was the first time in history that a member of the anti-government army stood in the Federation's highest council in broad daylight. This matter itself was history. In the Wangdu condominium 120 kilometers away from the Parliament Hill, Su Lu was silently watching the live broadcast on TV. He looked at the girl who was both familiar and unfamiliar, calm and composed. There was no trace of the young and inexperienced girl from before, only a determined temperament. He did not feel that there was another historical event in the Federation. He only felt that the history of the past 2 years was ridiculous. Chapter 274. Su Lu had trained his body for too long last night, so he woke up a little later than usual. He cooked a bowl of instant porridge and did not go for a morning jog in the park as planned. Instead, he subconsciously turned on the TV. Watching the news on TV had become his main job for the past few days. He originally wanted to see the progress of the demonstrations in the Federation, as well as the strike in the 4 states around the mountain. He also wanted to see if Medellin would walk out of the Justice Department building, but he did not expect the Federation News Channel to start broadcasting breaking news early in the morning. The emergency hearing of the Parliament should be related to the matter he was concerned about, so he did not go out. He silently sensed the power flowing in his body while waiting for the hearing to start. However, when the beautiful girl appeared on the news screen, Su Lu knew that waiting was not the right thing to do. The girl had cut her hair short. She was dressed more simply and her expression was calmer. She looked in the direction of the camera and smiled slightly. She walked into the hall and walked up to the rostrum. She placed her hand on the Magna Carta and began to swear the oath. Su Lu thought that his eyes were playing tricks on him, or that it was an illusion. The most likely possibility was that the damn omnipotent Federation computer had invaded his brain again, causing him to have an epileptic hallucination. Otherwise, he should not have been able to see her. However, his rationality gradually returned, telling him that all this was real and could scare him. Especially when the girl said her name, he gradually shook off his absent-minded state. He walked in front of the TV screen and gently touched the girl's face on the news with his finger. He did not hear what she was saying, but his body trembled from the cold touch. After standing in front of the TV screen in silence for 3 seconds, Sulu turned around and took a shirt from the closet behind the door. He put it on and went into the elevator to the underground parking lot. He sat in the driver's seat of the black car, fastened his seatbelt, and turned on the car's TV screen to watch the Federation's live broadcast. He started the car and drove away from the apartment as fast as he could. He rushed onto Highway 2 and drove towards the Capital Special District under the clouds in the distance. You mean the Bureau of Proclamation can also make mistakes? The charter can't be wrong, but people can. On the holographic screen in the car, the Senate hearing was still going on. Sulu did not lower his head to look at it. He listened to every word that the girl said seriously. His expression did not change at all. He only looked a little pale, and occasionally, there would be a faint blush on his face. You were once a returnee, and according to your own account, you are now a spy for the anti-government army. I don't understand why you would risk being arrested and returned to S1, and even request for this special hearing. On the light screen, Senator Zion frowned and stopped Zhang Xiaoming from replying. He continued, a woman who has no loyalty to the Federation at all. How trustworthy is your testimony? I am loyal to the Federation, but I am not loyal to the Federation government. The anti-radar equipment on the car had already been turned on. All the sensors on the road were ineffective against the black car that passed by like a ghost. Sulu did not know how much he exceeded the speed limit, and he did not have the extra energy to care about the cursing drivers on the highway. He narrowed his eyes and paid attention to the progress of the hearing. He drove into the Capital Special District, bypassed the empty Hawking Avenue, and turned towards Charter Square. However, he was blocked by the busy traffic near Parliament Hill. Without any hesitation, Sulu casually threw the car on the side of the street, slammed the door, and ran towards the Senate building in the distance. He ran as fast as he could while tidying up his clothes. Only then did he notice that he had randomly grabbed a military uniform without epaulet. The traffic in the capital was usually not so busy. He did not know if it was the demonstration that blocked the traffic and hindered people's communication. Sulu angrily squeezed through the young students holding signs. By the time he reached the stone steps of the Senate building, a long time had passed. The front of the Senate building was crowded with news media. Only a few large television stations were allowed to broadcast the hearing live. As many as hundreds of reporters and cameramen were standing on one side of the lawn. In front of the chosen backdrop of Parliament Hill, they hurriedly reported the situation to the channel manager. They were making real-time news connections. The scene was chaotic. Sulu passed through the heavy cameras and quickly walked up the stone steps to the entrance of the Senate building. He was stopped by the police cordon and hundreds of military police. Outside the police cordon, other than the reporters, there were also some excited people who came for some unknown reason. Everyone was excited. Sulu wiped the sweat on his forehead. In this cold late autumn day, he was drenched in sweat from running. Through the shoulders and the brim of the hat in front of him, he looked at the tall and wide entrance of the Senate building. He listened to the discussions around him, but gradually calmed down. Seeing that the girl was still alive, he did not know why, but he did not need a reason. His body seemed to be controlled by instinct and rushed out of the apartment to the place closest to her. But then he suddenly thought, what was he doing here? Was it like in the movies, When the soldier who had gone on an expedition to the galaxy returned home in glory and was giving a speech at a special capital city meeting. Suddenly, his lover, whom he had not seen for 3 years, shouted his name from the other side of the lawn. So he was stunned, raised his head, looked into the distance, and was pleasantly surprised. He jumped off the stage and jumped into the pond, creating a trail of white splashes and startling a few lazy waterfowls. He ran away, and then hugged in the pond, lowered his head, and kissed her. There were tears. Was this a reunion? But this was not a reunion. Sulu felt a little cold, but he still stood stubbornly at the door, waiting for the girl to appear. Under the escort of the Ministry of Justice, Zhang Xiaomeng walked out of the Senate building. A confident and steady smile appeared on her face. She shook hands with the counselor who had specially escorted her out and said a few words in a soft voice. A news reporter handed over a microphone and asked a question loudly. Zhang Xiaoming smiled gently and did not answer the actual question. But she used her calm and sincerity to perfectly portray the image of the anti-government army in the mountains. Sulu looked at the girl in the middle of the stone steps quietly through the crowd. It had been a long time since he had seen her so closely. In the past, he had only looked at her from a dining table away. In the past, he had never looked at her from such a distance. But now, separated by the crowd, it was as far as the Milky Way. Zhang Xiaoming had become a lot more mature. This maturity was not because the harsh environment of Green Dragon Mountain had left an indelible mark on the girl's face. She was still young and beautiful, but there was a trace of inexplicable determination in her temperament. He did not know how many things had happened to her in the past year. The elf girl with the red devil horns had finally grown up. Sulu looked at her quietly and thought about it quietly. He watched her smile sincerely at the reporters and thought about the snow and porridge in the girls' dormitory in the plum garden. He had never forgotten those memories. Instead, because of her death, they had become unforgettable. But for some reason, when he saw her appear alive in front of his eyes, those memories that often appeared in his dreams in the middle of the night suddenly faded away. At this moment, Sulu saw Zhang Xiaoming turn her head to the side amidst the flashing lights. Her calm and steady eyes seemed to be wandering, as if she was looking for something in the crowd. Then, those eyes fell on his face. On the stone steps of the highest authority in the Federation, separated by the crowd and noise, Sulu and Zhang Xiaoming's eyes met. At this moment, it was as if there was no existence other than them. Zhang Xiaoming's eyes flashed with a trace of surprise, a trace of helplessness, a trace of guilt, a trace of sadness, a trace of uneasiness, a trace of joy. Countless emotions eventually converged into a single teardrop that slowly flowed down from the corner of her eye. Sulu quietly watched her cry in the crowd. His incomparably complicated emotions suddenly became clear and calm. A reporter in the crowd asked a question loudly. Zhang Xiaoming, who was in a daze and crying, came to her senses and slowly turned her head. It was so difficult to turn her head back. The flashing lights around her were so bright. Zhang Xiaoming clenched her fists tightly. That was why she had seen the other person later than he had. At that moment, she thought she had seen wrongly. The female anti-government soldier suddenly came to the capital special district and testified on Parliament Hill. This was the first time in the Federation's history that this had happened. The reporters and the public had been paying attention to the progress of the hearing. They were deeply impressed by the calmness and perseverance of the young girl on the stone steps. This girl had a temperament that was completely absent from her peers in the Federation. This temperament was extremely charming in front of this grand building. However, at this moment, many reporters and the public noticed that the calm and determined girl suddenly had tears in her eyes. "Miss Zhang Xiaoming, may I ask why you are crying?" The reporter asked loudly. "Is it because you remember the unfair treatment you once suffered, or is it because you are angry at Senator Macklin's despicable actions?" "The flashing lights are too bright," Zhang Xiaoming replied with a smile. There was laughter all around. Amidst the laughter, the girl looked out of the corner of her eye. However, she sadly found that the boy had disappeared into the crowd. The moment she turned her head, Su Lu did not hesitate any more. He immediately turned and left. He had come, seen, and confirmed. That was enough. He walked down the stone steps in loneliness. Then, he was blocked by a group of Justice Department officials wearing trench coats and holding black umbrellas. The sky above the capital's special district was cloudy and thick. However, the probability of rain in late autumn was very low, so the pedestrians on the streets and the reporters on the stone steps did not carry umbrellas. Therefore, these officials wearing trench coats and holding black umbrellas were particularly eye-catching. Trench coats and black umbrellas were the standard equipment for Justice Department officials in autumn. Just like the heavy black commercial vehicles of the Federation Investigation Bureau, it clearly showed their identity. Chapter 275. Su Lu had only had time to brush his teeth after waking up. He hadn't even combed his hair, so his somewhat messy black hair was scattered across his head. He quietly looked at the Justice Department official in front of him and noticed that this person's face was slightly red, and he was panting heavily. It seemed that he had just run not far. "I won't cooperate because I'm not in the mood." At this moment, his feelings were complicated and heavy that no one could understand. He glanced at the official in front of him, shook his head, and walked forward somewhat numbly. "You have to cooperate." There were about 7 or 8 officials from the Justice Department, and they directly blocked his path. The official from before said coldly, "Just now we went to Wangdu Apartments to look for you, but you ran away first. We followed you all the way here and were almost shaken off by you. It took us a long time to find you. If you don't come with us, I have the right to arrest you." At this moment, Su Li's feelings were very messy and terrible, but it didn't take him long to understand what this Justice Department official wanted to investigate. Naturally, it was related to Zhang Xiaomeng, who had just walked out of the Parliament building. The Justice Department wanted to accuse Senator Macklin of participating in the Lin Hai assassination, so they naturally needed his testimony. However, this was a cold and sad day. He just subconsciously wanted to leave the crowd behind him, leave his chaotic emotions, and leave this place as soon as possible. Therefore, he didn't want to go to the Justice Department for any investigation. He pushed the official in front of him away and continued to walk forward in silence. Suddenly, a voice said, "If I'm not wrong, our goal should be the same. You know that we are investigating Macklin, so I think you should come with us." Su Lu looked up and saw Inspector Xiao Wenjing. He was no stranger to this inspector. During the murder case on Hushan Road, the two of them had interacted many times. In the recent news, this inspector, who had been temporarily transferred to the Justice Department to be in charge of the Macklin case, had been on the news many times. Goal? What goal? Su Lu met his serious gaze and suddenly opened his mouth. His voice was full of self-mockery and frustration. It was unknown whether he was asking the other party or himself. Under the obstruction of Inspector Xiao Wenjing, the officials of the Justice Department watched the young man leave without taking any coercive measures. The officials looked at Xiao Wenjing and asked for the reason in confusion. They anxiously thought about the importance of this person to the Macklin case. "When we checked the files this morning, he was from the Department of Defense. We didn't have the authority, so we could only ask for his cooperation." Xiao Wenjing looked at Su Li's back as he walked toward the lawn. For some reason, she could feel the emptiness in this young man's heart. The efficiency of the Ministry of Justice was very high. When they found out that the Green Dragon Mountain anti-government army had provided an important witness, the follow-up work immediately started. Thus, Xiao Wenjing saw a lot of secret files regarding Su Lu. Xiao Wenjing knew that Su Lu and the girl who was being interviewed on the stone steps were once lovers. After some sorting out, it didn't take too much effort for this sharp inspector to guess what had happened. The recent series of scandals in the Federation also made him understand why this man named Su Lu was involved in the murder case on Hushan Road. Even if he is an officer directly in charge of the Department of Defense, this matter is too important. In the future, we will need him to testify in court, an official said. Keep an eye on him. I will go and apply for the authority. Also, don't provoke him at this time. He is probably in a bad mood. Xiao Wenjing walked toward the car and said, Actually, when he thinks it through, he will come and find us. Su Lu sat on the bench by the lawn and thought for a long time, but he still couldn't figure it out. His honest and simple face didn't show the intense inner struggle at this time. Instead, he looked a little lonely because of the silence. She was still alive, which was good. However, why was his heart filled with joy and also sadness? Was it because he was deceived? But he should be very clear that the news of her death was hidden because of the influence of many people. But why was he still sad? He was not a fool. He knew very well what it meant to have the girl of his first love come back to life. He also knew that his 1 year of time, 1 year of sadness, 1 year of hard work, and 1 year of disregard for life and death were all fake. However, she was still alive, wasn't she? It was better for her to be alive than to be gone forever. Since that was the case, what was there to be angry and dissatisfied about? But in the end, his mood was like the late autumn wind. It was still a little bleak, and not like a young man. Because of her death, he had cried in pain and tossed and turned in bed at night. In order to seek justice for her, he was not even afraid of exposing his identity as a fugitive from the Federation. A small character like him had resolutely thrown himself into the great turmoil of the Federation. He was as tenacious as a rock and stared at Senator Macklin like a poisonous snake. He worked hard and threw himself into the development of New Mecca. He trampled on Lin Yuanhu and ruined the other party's election. He opened his eyes wide and wanted to see how Macklin would die. If the Federation did not let him die, he was already prepared to put his life on the line to kill Macklin and avenge her. The breath he had held in his chest for a year, at the moment when he was about to release it, he suddenly realized that there was no reason to hold it. It was like an animal that had hibernated for half a year, only to realize that the vast expanse of white snow was fake. It was a bubble that had been torn apart. The source of all that he was willing to give up, everything was also fake. Su Lu sat on a bench and silently looked at the calm pond in front of him. The pond was very large and reflected the majestic Parliament building. Because of the cold weather, the birds had already flown to South Kazhou, and not many of them came to accompany the lonely Su Lu. Su Lu was indeed happy that the girl was still alive. He had never been so happy before. But what followed was disappointment and bitterness. What exactly was he in her heart? He was a genius in mecha mechanics and a powerful young expert. But the first love of his life was so bizarre that even a novelist would find it hard to imagine. He could not understand it at all. After Uncle Feng Yu died, he told himself never to cry again. Then, when he found out about Zhang Xiaoming's death, he cried in his blanket. Today's complex emotions made his nose ache. He could not explain it clearly. The young lad only wanted to cry properly in front of the still water in front of him. At that moment, the phone rang. Su Lu took out his phone from his pants and said a few words. Just as he was about to turn it off, he saw another call. On the other end of the line was Zhou. Her voice carried a trace of nervousness and doubt. Other than the Federation government's intelligence department, the only people who knew about the story between Su Lu and Zhang Xiaoming were those closest to him. The eldest daughter of the Zhou family was naturally one of them. When she saw the girl named Zhang Xiaoming on the news, she immediately thought of how shocked Su Lu would be when he found out. Su Lu spoke a few words to her softly over the phone and calmed down a little. It was always good to have friends who cared about you at such a time. After hanging up the phone, he lit another cigarette. He wanted to get rid of the sour smell in his nose. He thought that since Yu had already made the call, no one should bother him anymore. At that moment, an email was sent to his phone. There was a simple line of words on the email. I told you a long time ago, love is about two mouths. You're not crying right now, are you? One last thing, at least she's still alive, right? If you're disappointed and sad right now, doesn't that mean you want her to die? Lu stared at the phone screen in a daze. He didn't try to call back because he knew that the guy must have turned off his phone and thrown the card away in the shortest time possible, just like the previous few times. He smiled. Now that he was wanted by the Federation, he didn't hesitate to take the risk to persuade him. Mr. Schur was really a good guy. Lu stubbed out the cigarette. He was about to pinch the cigarette with 2 fingers and look for a trash can like in the past, but after thinking about it, he threw it into the beautiful, quiet, and birdless pond. Yes, it was better to be alive than dead. This was a good thing, but it would no longer be his problem in the future. He forced a gentle smile on his face, buttoned up the collar of his military uniform, and walked toward the bus stop outside the lawn. When he walked to the side of the street, a bus stopped at the license plate, and Bai Yulan walked out. This delicate man still had his head down, and his black hair fell in front of his forehead, swaying gently in the autumn wind. Bai Yulan noticed that Su Li's mood seemed a little strange today. The smile that came from his heart in the past seemed a little awkward. He didn't know the specific reason for this, so he silently followed beside him. The 2 men walked silently to the street. Suddenly, a few black bulletproof cars drove in front of them. There were police cars in front and behind, with sirens blaring to clear the road, protecting the important people in the cars. Bai Yulan glanced in that direction and said softly, "Even the people in the mountains have started to make a move. Senator Macklin probably won't be able to hold on this time." Su Li's eyes didn't move at all. He quietly looked at the colored bricks on the sidewalk in front of him and asked softly, "Just now, you said that the company has a mission? I remember that the 7th team hasn't had a mission for a year. The Security Advisory Department should be very clear that you guys are not suitable candidates to be bodyguard." Just as he was talking, the heavily guarded motorcade slowly drove across the street. In the back seat of the car in the middle, Zhang Xiaoming stared blankly at the man across the street through the bulletproof glass window. She was silent. In the barracks of the Special Operations Division of the 2nd Military Region in S2, a young officer named Yuan Zitai was staring blankly at the scene of the hearing on TV. He was silent for a long time. He blocked the gazes of most of his colleagues, but no one angrily expressed their opinions. This was because in just half a year, Officer Yuan Zitai had gained the respect and even awe of everyone with his bravery in battle and excellent military training. Although he had the recommendation of the 1st Military Academy, if he didn't show the corresponding ability on the battlefield, it was impossible for him to gain the trust of the army. According to his education, he was a 2nd lieutenant when he first joined the army. In just less than a year, he was promoted to captain. This was really a speed that made people envious. Chapter 276. In this universe, Tai Zhuan was the one who understood the story of Su Lu and Zhang Xiaoming the most. He understood it even better than Shi Qinghai. He personally arranged the Double Moon Festival Ball and gave Su Lu a surprise. He personally facilitated the reunion of the young man and woman under the double moon pillar. He even knew that Su Lu only lasted a short while on that wonderful night before he was utterly defeated. Because he understood, he had a deep impression of it. He, who used the pseudonym Yuan Zitai, quietly watched the girl on the news. He knew that Su Lu must be feeling very complicated and uneasy, but he only felt cold and angry. He saw Su Li's silence and sadness after hearing the news of Zhang Xiaoming's death. It turned out that all of this was just a setup. The person who set this up might have their own intentions, but if a woman could bear to see the man who loved her fall into despair, It was really cold to the point of being cold-blooded. At this moment, Tai Zhuan suddenly wanted to give Su Lu a call. He wanted to temporarily forget about his life plans and comfort his only friend in the Federation. However, at this moment, the division commander walked in with an ordinary-looking middle-aged man. He coldly turned off the TV and ordered them to assemble. After they assembled, the division commander looked at the elite special operations team and said in a deep voice, "Now we are announcing the Bureau of Proclamation's second sequence mission. From this moment on, you are to cut off all contact with the outside world. Except for direct orders from the Bureau of Proclamation, reject all requests from the military. Your mission is to enter Green Dragon Mountain and find a grave." The middle-aged man was an official from the Bureau of Proclamation. After confirming that there was no possibility of any leaks, he showed a picture on the holographic screen and coldly said to the soldiers below, "Find it and dig it up." Tai Zhuan's eyes narrowed. Friends who had been with Su Lu for a long time seemed to be infected by that cheerful young man. When they encountered a difficult problem, they would always narrow their eyes and hide their true emotions. The picture was an old-style double grave lying in an unknown mountain forest. The word "Mai" could be faintly seen on the tombstone. In the faraway sector of the West Woods, in front of the channel of the Night Scorpion Nebula, an elite Special Forces squad of the 4th Military Region was stationed. In the middle of the night, the closed door of the barracks was suddenly pushed open. Colonel Lake walked into the barracks with a solemn expression, turned on the light, and pulled up the information. He said to his subordinates who were still getting dressed, "Second order of the Bureau of Proclamation, infiltrate planet Karzi immediately, enter this company, and find all the information since the 37th constitutional era. If this matter is exposed, kill without mercy. Keep this a secret." The valiant soldiers looked at the information on the holographic screen, and their spirits were suddenly lifted. They were not a group of special forces that specialized in the battlefield, but a sharp weapon used by the Federation to infiltrate the Bermuda Star region. Every one of them had extremely powerful stealth abilities. They were all too familiar with the Bermuda Star sector. Planet Karzi was the second largest administrative planet in the Bermuda Star sector, and the name of the company was even more familiar. This company was engaged in the most notorious human trafficking business. If you can't bring back all the information, remember, the information from the first few years of the constitutional calendar is the most important, Colonel Lake said coldly, then put on his glasses. Generally, private spaceships flew in the vast universe, and its amazing speed could not be seen in the large-scale background at all. Now that the Federation's crystal mine resources were exhausted, space travel was extremely extravagant, and small private spaceships like this were even more extravagant to the extreme. "There are still 3 days before we enter the space passage," the gray-haired captain said softly to Lin Banshan. Lin Banshan gently stroked the Defei watch on his wrist, thinking about the information hidden in the watch, even his unmoving brows slightly furrowed at this time. "I hope it's not too late." He lowered his eyes slightly, and finally understood the thing that he had been puzzled about, but the possible truth of this matter made it difficult for him to understand. In the quiet Bureau of Proclamation building on the outskirts of the capital, the usually taciturn assistant to the bureau chief, whose expression rarely changed, frowned deeply. Looking at the investigation conclusion that kept flashing on the holographic screen, looking at the calculation report of the Federal Central Computer, in the end, he could not help but curse softly. He walked to the bureau chief's office, walked to the old bureau chief's side, and said in a deep voice, "The management committee called to inquire about the internal modification of the data in the Bureau of Proclamation. In the data of the Federation Investigation Bureau, the girl named Zhang Xiaoming should be dead, but she is still alive. No one can modify the data in the citizens' database. Someone in the Bureau gave the Federation Investigation Bureau fake data," the old bureau chief said slowly. "This is just a small matter, don't worry about it. Compared to the matter that the Bureau of Proclamation was investigating with all its might, the matter of Zhang Xiaoming's death data being tampered with was indeed too small as a sesame seed. The assistant chief took a deep breath and said, "I still can't believe it." "I can't believe it either." The old bureau chief watched the news report on the TV with narrowed eyes and said slowly, "But we must investigate. If it is fake, then it doesn't matter. If it is real, then I really don't know what will become of the Federation." The assistant chief turned his head to look at the TV news and said with a frown, "If he is really going to be put in prison this time, then we can relax the time on our side." The old bureau chief's narrowed eyes showed a hint of mockery. He has been operating in the Federation for so many years. Whether it is those ignorant and hot-blooded youths, or those families and politicians who think they are extremely shrewd, they have all become a net. The president or that madam will not stand by and watch the Federation society fall apart and become turbulent. As long as he takes a step back, the president and madam will not make things difficult for him. This is a proposition that has been proven in history. The vice president of the Federation is the legal speaker. Thinking of the 17 editorials, I finally understand what that person wants to do, but this understanding is somewhat unpleasant. The old bureau chief sighed softly and said, "It is good that those big shots have compromised. At least they don't have to worry about the election." It was already late autumn in the capital, but the heat wave island in the southern hemisphere was about to welcome the first wave of heat. On the beach, the girls in tight-fitting swimsuits were not stingy with their youthful naked bodies, and the men around them were not stingy with their burning gazes as they gazed at the scenery. Shi Qinghai, wearing a straw hat, was sitting in a beach bar with a bottle of beer in his hand. The beer on the heat wave island was very good and the girls were very good. The big gun he wanted had been hidden, and the mobile phone had been thrown into the toilet, so he was in the mood to drink and look at it. It seemed that he did not have to do anything. He smiled as he watched the hearing on the TV news and the crowd marching outside the Ministry of Justice. Although he could not kill Macklin with his own hands, it did not mean that he could not avenge his teacher. The information that he had worked so hard for a year had finally begun to play its role. It had caused such a big stir in the Federation, so Mr. Schur had the right to be proud. He looked at a beautiful girl who walked into the bar and could not help but whistle proudly. He thought that Su Lu should learn from his attitude towards life. Even if he appeared in the middle of the night, he should still reflect countless beautiful peach blossoms in his black eyes. Only then would he not hurt himself and not feel sad. "Miss, everything is good on this island, but it is too lonely." Mr. Schur began to approach and strike up a conversation. The beautiful girl looked at the dense crowd on the beach with some surprise. Just as she was about to move away from this man, who could not even strike up a conversation, she suddenly saw the man's face under the straw hat. She could not help but be dazzled, and her face turned slightly red as she lowered her head. Shi Qinghai hummed softly in his heart, "Miss, you're so pretty." He leaned over with a smile and said softly, "I'm going to stay on Heat Wave Island for a month. I just need a companion to step on this lonely sea." Su Lu sat alone in the lonely apartment. The TV screen was not on, so he just stared blankly at the autumn scenery of Huangdu outside the window. Lin Yuanhu had fallen, Professor Shin's efforts had been used on the MX Mecha, Macklin had been arrested and would soon be tried by the Federation's law, and Zhang Xiaoming was still alive. Suddenly, he did not know what he should do. It was just like how he had fled from the distant Eastwood district to the capital ring. He had only walked through this bustling area, looked at the absurdity, and shed a few tears. He had done what he should have done, and there was no reason to do what he had originally planned to do. Then what was he still doing here? Go find Uncle Feng Yu, he thought in his heart. However, when he thought of the email in his phone and Zhang Xiaoming, he had a bad idea. Bai Yulan had just informed him that there would be a special gathering at the company headquarters in 10 days. Team 7 was also included. The company here naturally referred to the Whitewater Company. Sulu knew who had remembered him and why. He just felt it was strange. Why would the Security Consultant Department want to recruit Team 7? That was a department that specialized in security work for the big shots of the Federation. With nothing to do and no one to see, Sulu thought silently for a long time. He felt that he had to find something for himself to do, so he decided to go and take a look. After the hearing on Parliament Hill ended, the live broadcast of the hearing immediately caused another round of controversy and shock. While the citizens of the Federation were shocked by the conspiracy to silence them, they were also very interested in Zhang Xiaoming, this girl who had a strange experience and escaped with her life, and her unique temperament. The protests and demonstrations in the various states of the capital ring were still going on. The university town of Linhai State was still a long way from being quiet. The 4 states surrounding the mountains were still on strike. After the hearing, the anger of the George Carlin movement's activists grew stronger. They all accused the military forces in the mountains of taking a divided path and betraying their comrade. However, in the eyes of political commentators and the government, with the evidence available, Senator Macklin's political life might still be able to continue, but under the dual attacks of the government and the anti-government forces, his life could only be spent in prison. Chapter 277. According to intelligence reports, your first boyfriend is now very impressive. He is one of the biggest contributors to the new MX mecha. According to an even more secretive source, he was the one who defeated Lieutenant Colonel Li Feng of the Lees of Philadelphia during the mecha testing. He should be a captain of the General Assembly base now. After this incident, he will probably be promoted again. This was a hotel in the western district of the capital. The terrain was quiet and surrounded by autumn trees, keeping the reporters outside at bay. This was the first time the Federation government had cooperated with the anti-government forces in the mountains. In terms of details, they had done very well. This hotel was not far from the training base of the Ministry of Defense. A large number of armed forces could be mobilized at any time to prevent accidents from happening. Zhang Xiaoming stood by the window and looked at the unfamiliar streets of the capital. Thinking about how he had lived in this city for a year, working hard for a year, she felt an indescribable sense of loss. She knew about Su Li's ability in the field of mecha repair, but she had not expected him to be able to participate in the Federation's development of the new MX mecha and play the most important role. Only mecha battle? In those beautiful memories of hers, Su Lu only spent his days in Section H of the library. He was born a soldier. How could he know how to operate a mecha? You met today? The middle-aged man in the room frowned. Looking at the girl's back, he vaguely sensed something. Zhang Xiaoming turned around and looked at him calmly. Yes, but we didn't talk. The middle-aged man was silent for a moment, then sighed and said, At least you should talk and hug. There's no point. Zhang Xiaoming lowered her head slightly. She knew better than anyone the stubbornness hidden in that boy's honest nature. The two brushed past each other. This parting was real. It was no longer a lie of parting by death, but a real parting of life. The middle-aged man looked at her quietly. Like a father, he patted her head gently and said, Call home later. After your parents see the news, they will definitely need you to comfort them. Zhang Xiaoming nodded softly and said seriously to the middle-aged man, There are government spies and surveillance facilities everywhere here. You shouldn't have taken the risk to come here personally. As the intelligence leader of the anti-government forces, this powerful person with the code name of he had come to S1 countless times, but it was indeed a bit risky to appear in this hotel today. He looked at Zhang Xiaoming gently and said, After all, it's a big deal. I was worried that you wouldn't be able to handle it, but it's much better than I expected. You didn't disappoint me. Zhang Xiaoming shook her head and said, Those big shots need me to help them defeat Macklin. My safety is not a problem, but you should leave quickly. The Federation government has put me on the wanted list for many years, but I am still alive and well, the middle-aged man said gently. Don't worry about anything. His extremely ordinary face, which no one could see through his disguise, suddenly flashed with a trace of deep worry, but he didn't say anything to the girl by the window. As an important figure in the anti-government forces, he had dealt with the Federation government for decades and knew how shameless those big shots and politicians were. In a manor hidden in the woods in the southern suburbs of the capital, the vice president of Sanlin Inha Bank, Li Xiuzhu, stood silently and stiffly in front of a chair like a piece of bamboo. This was an old black wooden chair. The armrests on both sides of the chair had been rubbed for many years and had become extremely smooth. After experiencing the baptism of time, this chair didn't show any signs of decay. Just like the old man in the chair. The old man sitting in the chair had a face full of wrinkles. His body wasn't very tall, and he wore a large shirt with a funny little black hat on his head. His pair of turbid eyes occasionally flashed with light, revealing a trace of wisdom that saw through the world. No one in the Federation had ever dared to make fun of the little hat the old man wore, although this hobby was indeed a bit strange. The current head of the Li family, Li Yuangong, looked gently at his son in front of him. He suddenly extended an old finger and pointed at the little hat on his head and said, "Actually, many years ago, someone once made fun of me." Li Xiuzhu frowned. There was still someone in the Federation who dared to be so bold. That person must be dead. That person didn't die. The old man from Li Yuangong smiled and said, "Because he isn't someone I can kill. See, this is the problem of strength. Don't think that our 7 great families are too powerful. You have to know that even Lady Tai has obstacles that she can't overcome in her life, let alone us. The reason I'm saying all this is to tell me that I, as your father, have admitted defeat in my life, and more than once." The head of the iron calculator family was an absolute big shot who could devalue the value of countless financial products in the Federation and create a financial storm on a certain planet with a stretch of his hand. The first lesson for his successor today was to admit defeat. Failure isn't scary. What's scary is that we actually chose a businessman like Senator Macklin. The old man from Li Yuangong chuckled and stroked the few strands of white hair outside the little hat. He said, "This old guy can even convince me. He's really powerful." Li Xiuzhu, who had been silently listening to the lecture, summoned up his courage and explained, "Even if Lady Tai's final method is a hearing, that doesn't mean we've lost. Those youths under Senator Macklin clearly have greater agitation ability than we thought. The 4 states around the mountains went on strike, and the university towns suspended classes. I don't believe the government has the courage to truly continue the trial." The old man from Li Yuangong quietly listened to his son's explanation. He slowly sighed and said, "Idiot?" These 2 words were very ordinary, but Li Xiuzhu felt a cold wind blow over, freezing the perfect heating facilities and the fireplace fire built for aesthetic purposes. He suddenly felt that if he were a bamboo, then the bamboo's outer appearance would definitely be covered in a layer of frost. How many years has the Federation been around? How many years has the 7 great families been around? You should properly study history. The old man from Li Yuangong said gently, "So what if we lose the election? The Federation has changed many presidents, but the 7 great families will always be the 7 great families. Families like ours have long been deeply rooted in the soil of the Federation. Take our Li family as an example. If our Li family collapses, then the Federation's finances will also collapse. But don't forget another very important point." The old man's tone suddenly became cold. "If the Federation collapses, then our Li family will also collapse. So no matter what you do, you must remember not to endanger the fundamental interests of the Federation. Everything that Macklin is doing right now is too dangerous, because this threatens the foundation of the Federation. Although we can control the chaos if it really happens, this kind of method is not something that we can allow. Li Xiuzhu was silent for a long time, trying to digest his father's teachings. In the end, he said softly, "I understand." "No, you still don't understand." The old man from Li Yuangong narrowed his eyes and said, "Humans travel through the universe, but they have to live on planets. When you stop standing on the top floor of that ugly bank building to look at the scenery and are willing to walk on the streets more, you will probably understand this point." Li Xiuzhu's face was full of shame. He lowered his head and didn't say anything. After a long time, he asked softly, "Then what do we do now?" "I don't think the madam will stop. I just said that if our family collapses, then the Federation's financial system will also collapse." A strange smile appeared on the old man's face. "But if even the head of the Tai family can still speak when their family collapses, then the entire Federation will also collapse. I reminded you in the past, don't look down on them just because they have kept a low profile for thousands of years. But you didn't listen. When the Crown Prince was assassinated, us old guys had to personally go to the back of Macho's mountain to explain. When you really take over, you will probably know how powerful the Tai family is. However, the madam's side won't have bad feelings towards us because of this. You should know that the Federation has chosen so many presidents, and every family will choose a different candidate as their partner. This is a tradition, this is history. It's just that this time, the movement seems to be a bit too big," the old man said softly. But, although Li Xiuzhu didn't know anything about the history behind the scenes, he finally had an endless fear towards the Tai family behind the shadow. He said slightly nervously, "If Macklin really participated in the Linhai incident, then it's really over." At the beginning of the year, the Crown Prince of the Tai family was assassinated in the Linhai Stadium. Li Xiuzhu stayed out of the matter and watched coldly, because he knew that this matter had nothing to do with the Li family. However, he didn't know that his father had personally gone to the back of Macho's mountain to explain this matter to the madam. But now, the Li family was Macklin's backer behind the scenes. At this moment, Li Xiuzhu's phone rang. He took the phone and listened carefully for a while. He nodded hard and reported to the old man sitting on the black wooden chair. Macklin released a message from the Ministry of Justice building. He is willing to give in. In the morning, a few expensive cars followed the mountain road and passed through the roadblock. They traveled along the mountains, through the water, and through the heavy iron gate, and arrived at the picturesque manor in the back of Macho's mountain. The current head of the Li family walked out of the car with the help of his servants. Li Xiuzhu followed behind, and the security guards of the Li family were immediately sent to other places. Butler Jean had a humble smile on his face as he welcomed the father and son into the manor. The useless young master of the Lin family naturally didn't want to see him, but this father and son, who were very influential in the Federation, were very different. On the side of the balcony, Lady Tai, who was wearing a solemn long dress, looked at the old man with a smile and said, "I haven't seen you for almost a year. It seems like your cough is much better." Chapter 278. The head of the Li family, Li Yuangong, didn't have a problem with coughing. Li Xiuzhu knew this very well because he was his father. Thus, when he saw his father bend over while coughing, he immediately understood what it meant. A wave of sour, numb, and angry feeling rushed from his heart to the top of his head and was about to burst out in an instant. One couldn't blame the heir of the Li family for having such a strong reaction. They were all part of the 7 great families of the Federation, enormous powers that had drifted along the long river of history for countless years. What kind of status did the head of the Li family have? Even in front of the president and speaker of the Federation, he didn't have to lower his head. Moreover, right now, Li Yuangong was only facing a woman, even if she was the madam of the Tai family. However, Li Xiuzhu wasn't an idiot like Lin Dohai. Seeing his father lower his head with his own eyes, He could only gently clench his fists and breathe quickly a few times. During this process, he actually maintained a calm expression. However, the anger and bitterness in his heart had long overflowed. He thought to himself that if he hadn't recklessly interfered with the presidential election and blamed the wrong person, how could his father have suffered such humiliation? On the side, Butler Jean acted as if he didn't notice the small movements of the Lee family's young master's hands. He looked down and politely invited him to the side hall to rest for a while. The conversation on the terrace only belonged to the heads of the two families. Li Xiuju's status wasn't high enough to participate in this conversation. The early morning sun was clear and bright. The cold wind of late autumn was blocked by the 4 continuous peaks of Macho Mountain. The warmth contained in Macho Lake rose along with the mist, raising the temperature on the terrace quite a bit. Back then, the royal family had designated this back mountain as a royal garden. There was naturally a reason for this. Lady Tai personally poured a cup of milk tea for Li Yuangong and said with a smile, "Why did you have to provoke him earlier? Children these days are all incredibly arrogant. If you provoke him too much, I'm afraid it won't be good." At this time, the old man of Li Yuangong seemed to have completely forgotten his previous coughing. He bowed and sat steadily in the chair. He replied gently, "It's just that he's a bit too arrogant. He has to be polished a bit. Also, every time I see the madam, I have to bow. This is a rule that cannot be forgotten. It's been so many years. Who still cares about those rules?" Lady Tai said with a smile. "Besides, there's no need to do this in front of your son." After a few words of idle chatter, they got to the main topic. The two heads of the 7 great families had already handed over the specific matters to the next generation or their subordinates. Their daily lives were really similar to that of immortals. However, today's matter involved the entire Federation, so they had to be more cautious and direct. Medellin is awake. The head of the Li family looked at Lady Tai with a smile and said, "It seems that the old guy is not willing to play the role of a martyr whose name is recorded in history. I don't know what role this councilman wants to play." Lady Tai raised her cup of milk tea and took a sip. The two of them remained silent. Only the morning breeze gently blew on the terrace. A few layers of autumn clouds faintly moved in from the east, but it didn't look like it was going to rain. For important figures at the level of these two, there were many things that didn't need to be said clearly. For example, why Lady Tai was willing to let Medellin go. Councilman Medellin was involved in many matters of the Federation. If he really was brought to trial, not to mention that the Li family's interests would be severely damaged, just the prestige of that old man among the Federation's people was something that the Federation government and the 7 great families had to consider. The current Federation society had already become uneasy because of the recent series of events. Antagonistic sentiments had already gradually emerged among the people. If this fire wasn't extinguished, the Federation's situation would be very dangerous. The poisonous fruit that George Carlin planted still needs a relatively gentle person to carry it. Lady Tai suddenly said softly, "Medellin is still a bit better than that Nanshui leader who only knows how to kill." Li Yuangong smiled slightly, not saying anything. The discontent in the Federation society was like nutrient. Right now, most of these discontent nutrients had been absorbed by Councilman Medellin. If Medellin really died, these nutrients would inevitably find a target again. Perhaps they would once again be directed towards those hard-working people in the mountains. At that time, if they wanted to suppress the anti-government army that was growing like weeds, the Federation government and these important figures related to the Federation would have to spend who knew how much money and effort. The Federation's old system had always needed and even welcomed people like Councilman Medellin. If it wasn't for this, how could those crafty councilmen and the 7 great families who watched everything from the shadows allow an outsider like Medellin, who had an anti-government army background, to participate in this political feast? In the past 10 years, the so-called non-violent advocacy, the so-called legendary politician, Councilman Medellin, was only a symbol that the Federation needed. Or perhaps it could be said that many powers were intentionally or unintentionally raising a little white rabbit. It was just that this little white rabbit had recently discovered that carrots were too delicious and was actually a bit reluctant to leave. This violated a taboo. Even though the head of the Lee family had previously praised this old fox's political wisdom in the depths of his heart countless times, he still believed that he could only be a little white rabbit. They didn't want to beat this little white rabbit to death. They only wanted him to be a little white rabbit again. "What does he want?" Lady Tai asked softly. Li Yuan-gong smiled and stated a few conditions. Lady Tai put down the Guna porcelain cup filled with milk tea and calmly looked at the milk tea in the cup. Her hands were calmly placed on the hems of her long skirt, palms facing the sky, not moving at all. The morning wind on the terrace stopped. The clouds in the sky also stopped moving. The back of the mountain was clear and bright. After a long time, she raised her head and calmly said, "Okay." "Thank you, madam," Li Yuan-gong said with a smile. Mr. President handled the matter of Dean Lin quite harshly. "This isn't good," Lady Tai said with a smile. "In the afternoon, I'll go persuade him." "Thank you for your hard work, madam." Li Yuan-gong lowered his head in respect. Lady Tai was also very satisfied with today's conversation. She eliminated the instability within the Federation Society, continued the path she had set in the past, perfectly won the presidential election, and obtained even more benefit. What else did she need? As for what she or he did, what kind of harm it would bring to certain people, what kind of ugly page it would write in the history of the Federation, they didn't care. This type of person would never appear in history. They had always been trying to control history, create history, and change history. Lady Tai's hands that often cooked weren't all that white and tender. She casually wiped them on her skirt, picked up the milk tea, and took a sip. The back of her hand was facing the sky as she gently placed it on the table. She began to chat with Li Yuan-gong's elder. "Wherever you go, you always bring that black chair with you. I've always been very curious, what's so good about that chair? I'm old, I'm just nostalgic. Madam, the chair here is very comfortable. Why would old bones bring it around? That chair has to be passed down. I really think that the Lee family's old Seven is a good kid. Old Seven's performance this time was very good. His eyes are very sharp. Speaking of which, that little guy called Su Lo is really not bad. The little guy doesn't know any better. He's a bit hot-tempered. When the fire dies down, I'll bring him out to meet an old friend." According to some news, the Empire's finances seem to be in trouble. Is that so? The Federation's preparations have to be faster. It seems that Macklin's luck is really good. At this moment, the rain began to fall even though the wind had yet to blow. It turned out that the layers of thick autumn clouds in the sky had already drifted over, sprinkling down patches of rain. It added a bit of melancholy to the autumn lake and the autumn mountain. A transparent glass panel had automatically extended from the top of the balcony, covering the entire balcony. The rain pattered against the glass panel, but it didn't affect the two big shots' casual conversation in the slightest. 3 days later, Zhang Xiaoming looked worriedly at the autumn scenery of the capital outside the window. This continuous rain had lasted for 4 days, and she didn't know when it would end. The hearing on Parliament Hill was already on the 4th day. The cold and dreary autumn rain naturally couldn't stop the proceedings from progressing. However, from the beginning of the 3rd day of the hearing, she felt that the atmosphere was a bit strange. The members of Parliament Hill had remained silent at the beginning, but on the 3rd day of the hearing, many members, including Member of Parliament Zion, began to throw out tricky questions, clearly showing that they didn't trust her testimony. She was no longer the naive girl who didn't know anything and only had passion and ideals. In the face of those tricky and even somewhat rude questions, she behaved very appropriately. She responded logically and methodically. In the face of the verbal attacks from the Federation members, she didn't retreat or panic at all. The federal television station was still broadcasting live. This lady from the anti-government army had won the admiration of a considerable portion of the federal citizens with her performance in the parliament. However, the sudden collective suspicion of the federal councillors made the citizens, who were already in a state of uncertainty and fear, begin to doubt whether this was a conspiracy again. They began to sympathize with Councillor Macklin again. Zhang Xiaoming wrinkled her nose and looked out the window. Only when there was no one around would she occasionally show her cute side of the past. Outside the window, the autumn clouds hung low, and the autumn rain fell like beads. She vaguely felt that some of the influential figures in the Federation had begun to move. However, didn't these people know that after the clouds and rain, there would be a bright blue sky in the end? At this moment, a waitress pushed the food cart in. Zhang Xiaoming was slightly startled. She turned around and put her right hand into her pocket. Other than having dinner with the officials of the Ministry of Justice, the various departments of the Federation government avoided contact with the representatives from Green Dragon Mountain. Therefore, these days their meals were basically delivered to their doorstep. However, Zhang Xiaoming keenly sensed that something was wrong. The waitress' footsteps seemed to be a little too hurried. 19771118. The waitress suddenly said a string of numbers. Then, she quickly took off her clothes and said in a low voice, "You're in danger. Leave quickly." Hearing the secret number and these words, Zhang Xiaoming's body trembled slightly. However, she didn't have time to say anything. She immediately took off her clothes and began to exchange clothes with the waitress. Chapter 279. The door to the dining room at the bottom floor of the hotel was gently pushed open. A waitress walked in with a dining cart. Her movements were very nimble, as if she had been doing this job for many years. Probably because of the hygiene requirements, the waitress wore a mask on her face and a hat on her head, covering most of her face. She didn't chat with her colleagues in the dining room. The waitress seemed to be a little sore. She waved to her colleagues and went straight into the lounge. Without stopping, she walked out of the lounge's side door and into the autumn rain. The autumn rain was cold. Zhang Xiaoming walked at a normal pace in the hotel's backyard. In a temporary shelter from the rain, she took off her work clothes and took out a change of clothes from a box. She also took out a piece of paper from under the clothes. The topographic map of the hotel and the exit route were drawn on the light yellow instant paper. She was very familiar with the hotel's layout. After re-examining the route and confirming that there were no problems, she stuffed the paper into her mouth and quickly swallowed it. It was a woman's trench coat with a hood. She flipped the hood over to block the cold raindrops and covered her face again. Walking along the stone path in the hotel's backyard, she soon felt that something was wrong. At this time, the backyard was deserted. Not many people would walk in the rain. Her figure was particularly eye-catching. A few people were walking toward her. Zhang Xiaoming didn't lower her head. Using the shadow of the hat as cover, she walked over with her head held high. Further away was the entrance guard. A few police officers were wearing raincoats, chatting about something in boredom. The Ministry of Justice had made a lot of preparations for this key witness of the hearing. The Federation Bureau of Investigation and the Police Bureau were also cooperating. Around the entire hotel, there were countless layers of checks and surveillance lines. On the contrary, to respect the dignity of the anti-government forces, the security on the upper floors was much more lax. The main task of these police officers was to ensure her safety and prevent the fanatical followers of Senator Macklin or the possible assassins from getting close to her. However, if she wanted to leave now, these people would become a problem. Zhang Xiaoming lowered her head slightly and looked at the police. She touched the fake ID and the little item in her pocket, took a deep breath, and walked over. Compared to the police here, the soldiers and the Federation's electronic network at the other exits were more troublesome. When they were about to reach the exit of the backyard, the few police officers in raincoats didn't show any special behavior. However, at this moment, several military vehicles painted in dark colors quickly drove over, stirring up the rain along the way. They braked violently and stopped at the entrance of the backyard. A group of armed soldiers rushed down from the military vehicle and quickly showed their authority to take over the defense at the back door. The rest of the soldiers entered the back garden. The moment the military vehicle entered her line of sight, Zhang Xiaomeng understood what was happening. Her footsteps did not slow down at all. She followed a small path by the back door and disappeared into the rain. A minute and a half later, she arrived at another exit before the Federation's deployment. However, there was no one from the organization outside this exit. Most importantly, this exit had the scanning program of the Federation's electronic surveillance network. The face of the girl in the hat was slightly pale, but her eyes were exceptionally bright. She made up her mind to break through this exit. Although it would definitely trigger the alarm, there was no one around, so she could buy some time. Just as she stepped into the scanning channel, a person suddenly came to her side. A faint blue light enveloped the two of them. The two of them walked quickly. The Federation's electronic surveillance network, which would never make mistakes, did not react at all. In the autumn rain, Zhang Xiaomeng and that person walked into an alley and got into a car that had already been prepared. The car stopped 3 times on the way and set up enough disguises before they arrived at their real destination. It was a simple hotel near the capital university that did not require identification. Zhang Xiaomeng wiped her wet hair with a dry towel. She looked at the person she regarded as her father and quickly asked, "Why did the Federal Army suddenly make a move?" "I don't know." The intelligence leader of the anti-government forces, the extremely mysterious middle-aged uncle, shook his head. It was already very late when the information came. It was probably a sudden decision by the Federation government. The people in the government did not have time to react. The middle-aged uncle was an important figure in the anti-government forces, but he seemed to not know his own importance. He was always active in the most dangerous capital special district. His outfit today was not as wretched as Su Lo had seen him before, nor was it as normal as usual. He wore a pair of glasses and looked like a middle-aged lecturer commonly seen in the capital university. Zhang Xiaomeng took out a small tool from her short windbreaker and placed it on the table. It was a cleverly designed stun baton. Within a range of 3 meters, it was more effective than a handgun. She did not ask the middle-aged uncle what the small device that emitted a faint blue light was, but she could guess. The Federation government had not been able to arrest him for so many years. He had always been very confident in running around the universe for the organization. The small device that could hide from Charter's eyes was definitely extremely important. The middle-aged uncle walked to the window, lifted a corner of the curtain, and looked at the capital university in the autumn rain in silence. The Federation government had turned against him. This was both within his expectations and beyond his expectations. Senator Macklin had not been convicted, and the big fish in the sea had not been caught. Why was his net abandoned? In the simple hotel room, the wallpaper was peeling. The color difference of the TV screen was a little off, and the news image on it looked a little distorted. Zhang Xiaomeng and the middle-aged uncle watched the news in silence. Their feelings were as unreal as the image on the TV screen. In the news image, the breaking news reporter from the Federation TV station was anxiously saying, "An important witness in the Macklin case, an important witness from the anti-government forces, Zhang Xiaomeng, suddenly disappeared this afternoon. There is currently no reliable information on what happened." Zhang Xiaomeng quietly watched the news and suddenly asked, "Is the source of your information reliable?" The middle-aged uncle said, "It's news from the president's office." The Ministry of Justice suspects you of perjury and is preparing to arrest you. Zhang Xiaoming thought of the murderous soldiers from before. She lowered her head and thought for a moment. Suddenly she said, "This is wrong. I have to go back immediately. It doesn't matter if they deliberately released the information or not. As long as I leave the hotel, those people will have achieved their goal of stopping the hearing." Zhang Xiaoming looked at the middle-aged uncle. For the first time, she doubted the judgment of her superior. There are no surveillance cameras in the room, but there are in the corridor and in the backyard of the hotel. They have the video in their hands, so they can shirk responsibility and say that I left on my own accord. They can push all the blame to the organization. The middle-aged man was silent for a long time before he said, "Even so, you can't go back. I admit that your judgment is very reasonable, but the organization won't let any of our comrades take unnecessary risks in order to succeed. If I don't go back, Macklin will still be alive," Zhang Xiaoming said stubbornly in a low voice. "You can't go back. As long as you leave the vicinity of the hotel, no matter where you are, the Federation government can kill you on the spot and say that we are silencing you," the middle-aged uncle said coldly. "I just don't understand why they are doing this." The room fell into a dead silence. Zhang Xiaoming said slowly, "It should be that the two sides reached some kind of agreement. Macklin accepted the other side's conditions and withdrew from the election. We have done our part and are no longer of any use. And the other side must have promised Macklin to settle the charges. Naturally, we can't enter the Parliament building again." An hour later, the Federation's television news confirmed Zhang Xiaoming's speculation. The Minister of Justice held a press conference and showed the video to prove that Zhang Xiaoming had left the hotel on her own accord. And at the press conference, the minister said with a heavy expression that they now had enough reason to suspect that the anti-government forces had deliberately created a facade to deceive the Federation's judicial system. The Ministry of Justice was investigating this matter. The female witness had probably sensed something and fled to avoid punishment. On a private television station's political news program, an expert expressed a different opinion about the breaking news that had happened that day. He looked at the camera and wondered if this was another incident that Senator Macklin's side had created to get him off the hook. This expert's opinion was immediately refuted by another guest. He believed that Macklin was still cooperating with the investigation in the Ministry of Justice building. Moreover, the video had proven that the female witness had left on her own accord. If there was a conspiracy, it could only be said that the Green Dragon Mountain had created a conspiracy full of loopholes. Then, the Federation's television station released the video of the hotel. Then, the Parliament announced that the hearing would be postponed temporarily to wait for the results of the investigation. The middle-aged uncle was silent for a long time. A trace of coldness gradually seeped out of his eyes as he slowly said, "If you insist on staying, they have too many ways to shut you up, such as your parents and Su Lo. They can even make you die regardless of everything. But if I take you away, they can make all the problems involve you. The honor of our organization has been taken away by that traitor. Our image has been bad all these years." This most outstanding spy of the 37 constitutional governments stood up. After a long silence, he said with a hint of frustration, "There is an old saying that when the wolves and the bay on the grassland are together, they will be bad to the core. Macklin has become one of them. He is indeed shameless. This feeling of being betrayed, though it's not the first time, still makes me feel bad." Zhang Xiaoming looked at her superior whom she respected so much quietly. Thinking of the rumors on Green Mountain, she couldn't help but feel dejected. His situation in the organization wasn't very good either. The leader of the Nanshui didn't seem to trust him as much as before. A person who only knew how to do things for the sake of his ideals, no matter how outstanding his ability was, would always lose to those vile people who were full of bad intentions. "Don't get involved in this matter anymore. Withdraw from S1 according to the third plan. After a moment of silence, the middle-aged uncle said, "Inform Su Lu when you're sure it's safe, so that he won't worry too much." In the end, he looked at the Minister of Justice on the news and said with narrowed eyes, "He would rather step down than bite us to death. Who can exert so much pressure? I'm curious, and I want to give them some gift." You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.